So I will call the meeting to order. This is a regular meeting of the Comfort Lake Forest Lake Watershed District. And the first item is setting the meeting agenda. Are there any additions?
I'm chair managers. No, none to my knowledge.
Okay.
Just
All right.
one question. I saw that there was a appraisal came in for the what is that? You know, the land we're purchasing.
Cranberry Lake.
Yeah, is there any need to put that on today's agenda, or we have plenty of time to work on that later on?
Yeah, there's no further action by the board actually. So we're just moving toward.
Okay.
The only question would be again is this element of accepting the grant, but I think I'll coordinate with Nick and see what there might be for the first weekend or first meeting in January, if anything, but that's on a reimbursement basis anyway, so that decision doesn't have to be made right away. So
Do we have a time period to accept the grant, or is it just assumed that we accept without answering?
it's good until I think 2023 sometime.
Oh, okay, good.
Yeah, that's really a sweet deal. We don't want to
Mhm.
miss it for some reason, you know, that's for sure.
Mhm.
Maybe you can talk about it a little bit more in the administrator
Right.
portion, okay? So everybody knows about that. Anything else?
Well, I mean, it's a regular meeting, we could add it for discussion for the agenda and have Nick cover a little bit about it.
Okay, should we put it under old business or new?
I guess that's old at this point.
Mhm. Okay, that will be item C under 9, old business. Cranberry Lake DNR grant. Okay,
Madam
All right.
Chair,
yes,
at the time, you can also touch on the appraisal if the managers have seen it. Your original action did indicate that the board would review the appraisal before proceeding.
okay. All right, so I will add the appraisal to that list, Cranberry Lake DNR grant and appraisal. All right, any further additions or comments on the agenda? If not, a motion to accept is in order.
I'll move that we accept the agenda as discussed and changed.
Is there a second? I will second the motion. Okay, roll call vote, please, Bobby.
Manager Anderson,
Aye.
Manager Schmaltz,
Aye.
Manager Taves.
Aye.
Manager Baki.
Aye.
Okay, motion's been accepted. And next is the consent agenda. Are there any items that any member would like to remove from the consent agenda?
Madam Chair,
Yes,
I noticed that the board minutes from November 18th and 30th, November 30th are not accessible via the agenda. I'm just wondering if those are going to be part of our agenda today for approval or if we're going to wait on those.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
Manager Baki, so they were not finalized for review by the end of the day Monday, and I did not feel comfortable then when we posted the meeting putting them on without the 3-day piece. So at this point, while I could have sent them out to the board for review and had action on it, I thought it was best just to wait until the first meeting in February or no, January at this point.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's fine.
Well, then we should remove those 2 items
From the agenda, yes.
from the agenda. Okay. I don't think we need a motion for that, do we, Mr. Parliamentarian? Chuck?
Well, Madam Chair, you can ask for unanimous consent, or you can just have a vote.
Okay, I will then ask for unanimous consent to remove items B and C for this meeting and to approve the other two items. Special board meeting minutes from November 10th and the 2022 staff work plan. Without objection? Okay, without objection, they have been accepted with those changes. Next is public comments on the 2022 budget and levy. Are there any members of the public who would like to comment on the budget? I'm not in gallery view, so I can't see.
Madam Chair, managers,
Yes,
as I am viewing the attendees, I see it only as staff and board members.
okay, all right, very good,
Is that accurate?
thank you.
Yes, that is accurate.
Okay, thank you. Then we will move on, as there's no public to comment on item 4. Public open forum, we can skip over. We've just confirmed there's no public present. And number 6, Citizen Advisory Committee update.
Madam Chair, managers, Aiden Reed is here this afternoon to give an update. Thank you, Aiden.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and managers. Attached to the board packet, you'll find my updates, including the meeting notes of our December CAC meeting. I can answer any questions related to those if you have a moment to review. My recruitment update related to the CAC would be, as directed by the board, I reached out to the Forest Lake Area High School and have had some positive communications with several staff members there, including their advisor for the environmental club, as well as the director of, I believe it's career development or college and career development, who is an advisor for what is known as LINK, which is part of their volunteer, group. And so they've requested more information, including a poster that can be sent out via announcements as the high school is moving to distance learning starting tomorrow. So still pursuing that line. Otherwise, I can answer any questions about the CAC at the moment.
Well, I was there and we had a it was a very good meeting, and we had a robust discussion about the special meeting on the 14th. So I think that was very worthwhile. And I think the next up on the rotation schedule is Manager Loth, correct? Just as a
Madam Chair, I
reminder.
believe Manager Baki did volunteer for that.
Okay, good. Yeah, I haven't seen the rotation, so I just wanted to, maybe you can do this, Aiden, each month, is just remind us who the next person is that's going, the next board member who will be attending, okay?
Absolutely.
right.
I'll add that having Manager Anderson at the meeting was certainly valuable, and I hope to continue having managers present when possible. Each month I will follow up with whoever has signed up in person now that we have dates for meetings confirmed.
Wonderful, thank you. Any further comments or questions of Aiden?
Just
All right.
one comment. I noticed that, was it Nez Heitkamp from the Lower St. Croix is working on this ag program. Are you two going to work together on that, Aiden?
Yep, so the committee had asked to have guest speakers when available and when relevant, and Ms. Heitkamp's work is certainly interesting to the CAC. We've been collaborating on some potential ag education events that would be various spots throughout the Lower St. Croix. Her target was to have some things in place for later this winter, so we're still developing that.
Okay.
She's working on some events targeting some smaller producers and then some more traditional larger operations as well. So that's something we've been in close communication with, and we'll be collaborating in the future.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, any other comments or questions of Aidan? All right, let's move on then to the next item, which is the aquatic invasive species update. And I assume that's going to be Garrett.
Yes, it will be. So, hello managers. I got a presentation for everyone. I know it's a busy meeting here, so I will try to be brief but thorough at the same time. I will take the screen share. All right, bear with me. All right, is everyone seeing this?
Yes, beautiful picture. Which lake is that? That's great.
That's Forest. I got to the office early in September, October, and yeah, the whole first access was like filled with cars and people were taking photos. So I snuck one too.
Good, it's beautiful.
All right, well, to jump into it, I'll just preface by that, obviously some of this material is going to be reviewed due to the monthly AIS updates. We'd like to keep all of our managers and the public and partners up to date as much as possible with what's going on. So while it might be some review, there might be some new stuff as well, or just a good refresher. As for the AIS treatments, I will briefly discuss them, but I'll let Steve McComas do the deep dive when he does his annual presentation. Sometime in January, I reached out to him, but haven't locked down a date yet. I'm sure he'll be available. He's pretty flexible. Lastly, feel free to cut me off if you have any questions as we go. Got quite a few slides, so if you have something, just spit it out because I might forget at the end. So I'll jump in with that. We'll begin here with the AIS year-end report. Again, I'll just summarize these reports, and if you want some more additional information, I would recommend reading the report if you haven't done so already, or Steve McComas will do that deep dive that I was talking about. I also tried to put everything in the presentation in the order that they appear in the report, so if you want to follow along, you can do so. All right, we'll start with Moody Lake aeration. The district operated the aeration system from January 4th until March 29th this year. Unlike last year, dissolved oxygens remained at a healthy level the entire winter. Last year, just due to extended periods of overcast and snowpack, dissolved oxygen levels were kind of getting low. Got staff a little bit concerned, but there were no major fish kills in either Moody or Shields that were reported to staff. There was a minor one or two in Forest Lake, but nothing major. And then on photo, hang on. Oops. All right, now you should be able to see my pointer. The photo on the right is just the signs that we put up, warning signs, and often the distance is kind of small, but we do a perimeter of little signs just to mark where that open water is going to be, just to prevent any anglers or snowmobiles from accidentally getting too close to where the open water typically opens up. And then on the left is Blaine using a rangefinder just to make sure that that perimeter is within the DNR's regulations for how far away the signs need to be warning people. Moody Lake curly-leaf pondweed. So this year, just like last year, the district received a grant from the DNR to perform this treatment. However, as you can see on the April 16th Blue Water Science Survey, there just wasn't a lot of curly-leaf pondweed in the lake compared to previous years. There's a little bit of light and a couple spots of heavy growth on the north side, but east and west, and certainly south, not much of all at all. So that was great to see. I'm not entirely sure what was going on, but I'm hopeful that it's connected to the improving water quality on Moody Lake, making conditions a little more favorable for native species and obviously less favorable for curly-leaf pondweed. I went back and took a look at some of the old reports, and evidence for this is that in 2020, the assessment survey found Elodea, which is a native species or commonly known as common waterweed, was found at 22% of survey locations, whereas this year, it was found at 69%. So quite the jump up. In 2019, it was at 46%. And then the only other data point that I could find was in 2014 when we did the first point intercept survey for the lake, and it was at 11% back then. So almost 70% of survey spots, a native species was found. So I'm hoping that that's out competing the curly pondweed, kind of crowding it out. And that's why we're seeing so much less in the lake.
That's a big deal.
It's exciting to see for sure. And
Yeah.
I'm hopeful that, Shields Lake is kind of the similar size and has kind of the similar makeup of species that once
Mhm.
that water quality starts improving too, that we'll see the same thing.
And we'll do some targeted communication to each of the lake residents, correct? Lake areas? Yeah,
Yeah.
good.
Okay.
All right, wonderful. Thank you.
All right, Bone Lake curly pondweed treatment. So on April 30th, 2021, Blue Bar Science went out, did their delineation survey, and again, they found hot spots of curly pondweed being on the northeast and southwest corners of the lake. It just seems like year after year, these two locations are the hot spots for it. Maybe it's the soil composition or whatnot, but those are typically where we're finding it. A treatment was conducted on May 26th by Lake Management Incorporated with Aquathol K. And as you can see on the right here, treatment was extremely successful and had full lake control of CLP this year. As for Eurasian water milfoil, I didn't include a slide on it just because, as has been the case in many of the past years, it just hasn't been an issue on the lake. There wasn't much on the lake this year again, so didn't really have much of a concern for it. Which is obviously great to report. All right. Zebra mussels in Bone Lake. All right, you've heard this recap probably dozens of times, but I'm gonna go through it again for everyone. Zebra mussels were initially discovered in 2019. Shortly after that discovery, treatment was performed by the district and partners around the public access where they were found, monitoring conducted by the DNR. Following that treatment, found veligers to be at high enough abundances to suggest a reproductive population was present somewhere in the lake, we don't know where. Survey continued throughout 2020, nothing was found. And then in 2021, staff continued with the wading surveys, sampler plates, and homeowner outreach, just asking people to take a look at their docks and water equipment as they pull them out. We even hired Blue Water Science again this year to perform a fall diving survey, which the photo here, I believe that Steve McComb was out there swimming around looking for him. Despite all that, still have not found anything, which is very surprising given that this is the third summer now after their discovery. I think has been the case with Forest Lake and Comfort Lake that, they were discovered and then next year they were definitely easy to find. And then from there, their population exponentially grows until it tapers off. For whatever reason, we just haven't seen that in Bone Lake, but that kind of ties into the next point I have here. Just a couple of weeks ago, I received a text from Keegan Lund, the aquatic invasive species specialist at the Minnesota DNR, just asking about zebra mussels in the lake and what we have found. And he too was pretty surprised that we have yet to find anything in the lake. So he has very generously offered to waive the lab fee to do an analysis for the zebra mussel villagers if staff is able to perform the collection of them. So I spoke with Matt Downing at the WCD, and he has the tow nets, and we obviously have the boat this year that we just purchased. So tentatively, we have on the calendar in early June to go out, do a villager tow or a couple of them, and then send it off to the DNR, and hopefully get confirmation if we still think that there's a population somewhere in the lake. Just looking at those numbers and comparing it to the 2019 villager count. There is a possibility that, and after speaking with Keegan Lund, that there has been some metro lakes where they were discovered, but they never took hold. I'm gonna be cautiously optimistic that, maybe we'll have a similar situation with Bone Lake, but it'll be good to get confirmation on that. So something to come here soon. I don't have a slide for this either, but just coming back around to water hyacinths and non-native Phragmites in and around Bone Lake. I just didn't include it because there hasn't been an update for the last couple of years. 2019, we found both species and we treated it. We removed the water hyacinth, and whatever was missed was likely killed by freezing temperatures throughout the winter. It's not a very frost tolerant species. And then for the non-native Phragmites, I think to the east of the lake, there was a small 900 square foot patch that we treated. Since then, it has been practically eradicated from the area, and a lot of native species like native arrowhead have popped up in its place. So that's pretty exciting to see. So moving forward next year, I'm going to pull those 2 items from the AIS report just because I don't ever have anything to say about them. But we're going to keep an eye on things and make sure that they don't pop up. But seems to be a success. And one more thing on the non-native Phragmites. So there's a pretty collaborative group of Metro partners that are working together to manage non-native Phragmites. There's a researcher at MACERC who has been documenting locations of all the populations. And in just the 8-county metro area, there's 410 populations. And as of this year, 64% of them have been treated so far. So we may have only had one spot that we treated, but it helps. It all counts towards that 64%. So pretty exciting to see such a large collaborative group working towards that common goal.
Garrett, before we leave Bone Lake, that's really exciting news again on Bone Lake. The only caution, I think it's more of a caution than a comment, but make sure that anyone that's coming into our district lakes with this kind of effort, and I'm talking about the Washington Conservation Service and their tow net and whatever else they're bringing with them, to make sure that they haven't been in a lake that has zebra mussels, that whatever equipment they're bringing in is clean, and we won't be introducing a potential new pathway for zebra mussels. You get what I'm talking about. I mean,
Absolutely.
Several years ago, we discovered that Washington Conservation Service was not cleaning the boat before they went from lake to lake, and so they would be in a infested lake, and then if Bone Lake or any other lake in our district was on the schedule for monitoring, they would just go from that lake to the previous lake to our district lake. So just make sure that we're maintaining that rigorous oversight on that area. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And in the defense of Matt Downing, he's often asked me after doing monitoring or something if there was a decontamination unit nearby, and I would direct him towards it and he would use it. So
Good, thank you.
But we'll reiterate that to make sure nothing's being brought into our lakes.
Okay.
Garrett, Manager Baki here.
Yes.
I would like to copy your Bone Lake year-end summary and post it on our Facebook, the Bone Lake Association Facebook page, and put it in the newsletter if we have room, if you're comfortable with that.
Absolutely, yeah. Are you just talking about the notes I just read through? Because I can send you those.
Yeah, well, I'm looking at the report you submitted as part of the agenda for today.
Okay, yeah. Feel free to use whatever you want from there.
Yeah, it's about a page and a half, and I think I can just copy and paste that for our Facebook page. And it's good information. I don't think people are really aware of the dive that was conducted in September, and I think that's important information for people to know.
Absolutely.
While the manager Schmaltz here, while Dave brought this up, I'd like to follow up on that because you haven't shown your new format that you're using for the AIS report today. And I thought that format was extremely good for just taking and then sending to the Lake Association members. And do you have a copy of one of your pages that we could look at on the new format that you put together? Did you bring that with you? It's a report you sent out to us.
You mean
within the AIS program year-end summary? Item A.
Did I bring it with? I'm sorry.
Yeah, usually you go through that report and not through the. I thought Blue Water Science was going to go through the actual AIS reports.
I mean, my presentation is based off that report that I included in the board packet, the AIS year-end report. I basically pulling the items that I talked about in there and just
Okay.
expanding on it a little bit.
My
So-
point is, I thought the new format was extremely good because
Oh.
the only suggestion I had is that while you listed what reports have been done, like these, zebra mussel study, if you make it an active link, then when it goes out to the Lake Association people, they can see the total picture of AIS and what's been done. And then if they will have an interest, they could click on that link and get more details on the delineation and the treatment programs that went in more detail.
All
I
right,
think
I'm sorry.
I wanted
I
the board
think-
to see that. That's why I asked you to show it if you haven't.
Gotcha. So you're saying add links into that AIS year-end report that link you to other reports that I'm referencing.
Right. Plus the fact that if you publish that on our website, that format is excellent. And if the reports done by Blue Science are active listings, then they have everything they need right in that one little report. It's very powerful, I think. And again, I think because we're now going to be doing more communication based upon what happened on December 14th here, we need to get this out to the Lake Association members by email, like Dave has suggested doing. That would be great for each of the lakes.
Understood. Yeah,
Mhm.
definitely. Okay, perfect. Appreciate the feedback. Oops, lost where I was. Okay, Little Comfort Lake Curlew Pondweed survey. So I've shown this again back in the summer. On July 22nd, myself and Bobby Law performed a early detection survey and meandering survey for CLP and kept an eye out for other AIS. The survey found primarily sparse growth around the perimeter of the lake. These red marks are obviously where it was found, but each of them, it was just maybe a couple stems here and there. Nothing that would warrant treatment, but it's always interesting that, a lot of the time when we're finding curlew pondweed in lakes that have a really dense band of native vegetation, which Little Comfort does, it might not be very diverse. It's mostly coontail and Elodea, but we're finding the curlew pondweed in areas of disturbance next to these docks and stuff. Not that these people are doing anything wrong. It's just, there's some exposed lake bottom that's not being taken up by native species and kind of gives the curlew pondweed a fighting chance in some of these lakes. In 2020, I did a purple loosestrife inventory on this lake, but besides that, again, we didn't find any other invasive species in the lake during the survey. Shields Lake carp management, another one that I've done a recap on a number of times, but I'll just go through it again really quick. Just a refresher. In 2019, the district hired WSB to perform a electrofishing and gill netting removal attempt in Shields Lake. In total, only 71 carp were removed, and based off of a population estimate that was included in that removal effort, it was estimated that another between 364 carp and 630 carp needed to be removed. So in 2020, another removal attempt was conducted, but due to an alum treatment that occurred in the fall of 2019, presented a new challenge. We wanted to avoid disturbance of the lake bottom sediments that the alum had treated as much as possible. So we were looking for ways to get carp out without being in the main basin of the lake. And then due to some comments by the Gulf Coast workers mentioning that they had seen spawning activity in a pond that was north of the lake, we decided to put a one-way gate at the mouth of that and then block off the exit with gates to prevent them from escaping. But ultimately, that plan wasn't very effective. I think maybe for a number of reasons. One being that the water level that year was pretty low in the spring, and that channel wasn't flowing as much as I would have liked. But regardless, in 2021, staff and myself researched alternative options and spoke with researchers, but unfortunately, it just seemed like the only option that was ever brought up time and time again was electrofishing, which is typically not used as a main removal option, and the DNR is sometimes hesitant to even give out a permit to do electrofishing just for the sole purpose of removing carp. Typically, they only, allow that as a tool for calculating the population. So that all said, I personally don't believe there's a major rush to perform another removal, as the age class data that we have from the population estimates and what we removed in 2019, it just appears that there's little successful carp recruitment in that lake, as all the fish that we took out were mature fish, very large fish. This suggests that the healthy panfish population within the lake is keeping the carp population in check. And obviously the addition of the aeration system will further protect that population in the winter, making sure that they're healthy in the spring when carp are spawning. And then also the addition of the DNR's new bag limit for the lake, which I believe is 5 fish per day. And I really should know that off the top of my head, because I've pulled this sign out on the left here in this small photo. I pulled that out of the lake about a dozen times and stuck it back in the ground. But I think they slashed it in half, if not more. So hopefully that, again, helps protect that panfish population. So all that, I'm not saying that another removal attempt isn't possible for the near future, but I'd just like to keep exploring options to see what is a better return on investment than electrofishing. And I think several meetings ago, I did a breakdown, and in 2019, I think out of the 71 fish, maybe 50 removed electrofishing. And obviously, as you whittle down the population, you can expect to only get fewer and fewer with every attempt. So it gets to be pretty expensive per fish, and I just don't see that it being a very good way of getting them out. Another consideration for the future is that I spoke with a Swedish researcher this summer about carp removal and alum treatments. He's done some studies on this, and apparently you can adjust your alum treatment to account for the carp population in a lake and offset any phosphorus release from their foraging and digging. Obviously, we just did the alum treatment not that long ago, but it's something to consider for the future. And MACERC has a bunch of different studies that they're working on for carp management, like the koi herpes virus and some poison bait that's very specific to carp, and a lot of different things. So I'm hopeful in the near future that there's going to be a more effective removal option that will present itself that's cost effective, because right now, presently, it's very expensive.
Garrett, were
Yes.
you at the MOD conference?
I was not at the MOD conference.
Okay, there was a presentation by EOR, and EOR has a system where they trap and channel the carp into a pathway where they congregate, and so it's easier to remove them. And they use tags, radio tags on certain ones to help, that's all part of the preliminary work that has to be done. But reach out to EOR and ask to see that presentation.
Sure.
I think you'd find that interesting and perhaps helpful for us.
Yeah, and that's kind of the idea behind the pond idea in 2020 that just didn't work. I think the struggle is that I do a lot of lake monitoring now, and on other lakes I see carp spawning. I have not once seen anything spawning in Shields Lake. I know that they're still in there, but I just have not physically or visually seen them spawning and splashing. So that makes it a little more difficult too, of where to set up, where you would trap them and stuff. But yeah, I will. I'll certainly reach out and get a copy of that. That'd be great.
Okay.
All right. Shield Lake Curly Leaf Pond weed treatment. Sorry. So April 16th, Blue Water Science went out, did their survey, and then they found 3.17 acres they delineated for treatment. There has been a very heavy band of curly leaf pondweed growing in this lake, as you can see, a lot of heavy growth, which we noted visually before the survey even took place. So 2 areas were delineated. That was treated in late May, I believe, and had very good results. Only 4 locations were left. Can't see it with the gallery here. Oh, yeah, 1 moderate growth and light growth. However, late summer, doing lake monitoring, myself and staff noticed a surprising amount of regrowth of curly pondweed, which was strange given that this was probably August when I noticed it, when water temps were still pretty high. So I'm not sure exactly what that's about, but we can definitely anticipate another large treatment next year. But like I was saying earlier about Moody Lake, I'm hopeful that as water quality improves from all the great projects the district has done, that it just naturally transitions from a curly pondweed dominant lake to more native. Lake Keewatin AIS Early Detection Survey. So on September 23rd, myself and Trey went out. Oh, sorry. Nope. Getting ahead of myself. On June 24th, Blaine and myself went out and performed a meandering AIS survey. Locations of curly pondweed were marked with the GPS, as you can see all these dots. And observation notes were taken at each location. Again, only a sparse amount of curly pondweed growth was found in the lake and didn't warrant any treatment. Each of these spots, again, it was like a couple of stems here and there. So nothing to be concerned about, because again, this lake in particular has a very diverse and abundant native aquatic plant growth in the lake that's very much outcompeting the invasive species. So and just like the Little Comfort Lake survey, again, it was locations of disturbance where we're finding curly pondweed being established near docks and boat lifts. Other than the curly leaf and purple loosestrife, which we'll get to here in a second, we did not observe any other AIS in the lake. In 2020, I asked Blue Water Science to do a purple loosestrife survey on Keewatin, just because having done monitoring that year with EOR, just noticing a lot around the perimeter. There was purple loosestrife eating beetles where we were launching our boat, but they just didn't seem to be having much of any impact on the population on the lake, as it was pretty widespread. So we just felt that in 2021, a herbicide treatment was our best bet to get a handle on things. So on September 23rd, PLM Lake and Land Management treated all the purple loosestrife around the perimeter of the lake. And then Trey and myself went out on October 14th to do a treatment assessment. And from what we can see shortly after treatment, it seemed pretty successful. We could tell exactly where things were hit. I think, especially in locations where it's really well established, like in this wetland area down by area 14, it'll take several years of treatment just because it is so thick and dense that it's hard for that herbicide to hit every single stem and kill it. But PLM said that the herbicide we were using was, he just had good results with it in the past, and that he does think we can get pretty good control after several years. So excited to see what things look like next year. Forest Lake curly pondweed treatment. April 30th, Blue Water Science went out, did their delineation, and there was a lot of curly leaves this year, as you can see. There was 22 locations he delineated for 120 acres total. Typically, and I think it's in our normal monthly report, it states that we don't do more than 110 acres of treatment, just because with Aquathal K at that level, you can get enough dosage in the lake to have full lake control. However, this year, just like many other things, if you're doing home renovations, you notice the price of things is really skyrocketing. Aquathal K was about 3 times as expensive as Diquat, so that made that decision pretty easy. We went with the Diquat treatment, which it takes a little more, so what we ended up doing was all 120 acres. And from that, you can see on the right here, on June 9th, treatment was actually very successful within the delineated areas. It looks like there's a lot of curly leaf left. And I mean, there is a fair amount, but that's likely due to some late season growth that occurred after Blue Water Science did their initial survey. So while there is still some remaining, I have to say that the treatment was overall very successful. And there's just so much around the perimeter of the lake, it's hard to hit every single one, but I think they've done a really good job with their delineation tactics to kind of delineate it all and have a good educated guess of where it's going to pop up. So I say overall successful. Eurasian water milfoil on Forest Lake. Delineation was performed on June 9th. And as you can see, very few light growth areas. We believe that having used dicot this year for the curly leaf boundary treatment, that it inadvertently had some sort of control on the Eurasian water milfoil, which is great because I know the Lake Association was performing or anticipating having a very large treatment this year, which turned out to not, didn't need to happen. But they did receive some grant money. So a follow-up survey was done on July 27th, and they just found a little bit more light growth in the area, mostly in Basin 1, a little bit of Basin 2 that the Lake Association did treat with a combination of dicot and Procelicor. I know Procelicor works better on larger populations, so it'll be kind of interesting next year if these locations still show some Eurasian water milfoil growth. But
Hey, Garrett, this is Manager Schmaltz again. Is Steve McComas going to speak today also or not?
I figured that this presentation was going to take a while, so I think we'll wait to have him on until January. And then
Okay,
he could do the deeper dive on the treatments and his thoughts on things.
yeah, because I want to mention that that's pretty significant, and because that's the first year that we've had a big drop off in the amount of milfoil that we had to treat. And I think maybe one of the reasons was that we moved our schedule for treating curly leaf, later into the schedule. So that probably gave it, I wanted to confirm that with Steve to find out if that's really what happened, because if that's the case, it's a strategy we may want to follow in some other lakes, especially Bone Lake, where they're having trouble controlling the Eurasian milfoil. So we'll have to make a point of having Steve comment about that when he comes in.
That would be interesting because early treatment for curly leaf is typically the goal. And so you're saying that because it was done later, it was able to capture the Eurasian milfoil.
That's
the
what the
same
thought
time?
was, because it's so dramatic. If you look at and again, he's got some nice charts in his regular report that shows the history of curly leaf and the history of milfoil. And milfoil has been going up. And this is the first year it was down like 80%, 90%. So it'd be good to understand what there was something that caused that. So we need to get a better understanding of what the deviation was, that we might try to repeat that if we can control it.
Yeah.
So.
A question for Garrett. This is Manager Taves. Do you have any idea at this point how the low water levels might affect the weed growths?
Yeah. Well, I mean, we suspect that, and I'll kind of touch on this on some other point here soon, is that obviously with the low water level, light penetration is going to be increased. So we're going to see growth further towards the middle of the lake than we're used to. So it definitely could have an impact on the growth, and maybe that's why Shields Lake, we saw some late season growth of CLP. I'm not really sure, but certainly when it comes to the flowering rush, we'll talk to on it here on the next slide, I believe. We suspect that the low water levels really played a part in why there was so much flowering rush this year.
Okay, thank you.
All right. And I could try to speed some of this up if this is taking too long. I don't want to hog all the time here.
Garrett, I'm just gonna tell you that this is a very important report.
Okay.
And I really appreciate your comments of condensing the highlights, if you will, the important points. So I would like you to continue at the same pace that you're doing it throughout the balance, because
Sure.
we're getting in, we've still got a few lakes left. This is critical, for the reason we exist, which is clean water. And I think the priority for a lot of folks now, they see the clarity and all of that, but it's this invasive species attack, and keeping that under control. So just go ahead and do your report.
Sounds good. There is some watercraft inspection stuff at the end. So yeah, like I said, I'll try to be thorough and brief, but I feel like I'm hogging your time. Tell me to speed up. I won't be hurt. So we'll jump back into it. The flowering rush. So as I mentioned in the past, I did a literature review early in the winter, and based off that, as Manager Anderson was stating that, like pre-leaf bindweed, you want to treat it earlier typically for it to be most effective. Well, that's exactly what Flowering Rush was saying, but the difficulty in that is that when it wants you to treat is typically when it's not emergent yet, so it's very difficult to survey. So based off of historical patterns, Blue Water Science put together 3 locations on Basin 3 on the southern end where we believed there to be regrowth, and we treated that earlier than normal. So that was almost about 8 acres. On June 27th, he came back, did his survey, and you can see that, yeah, location 3 looks like it probably had a pretty good effect. Location 1 maybe thinned it out a little bit, and location 2 maybe thinned it out a little bit as well. It's one of those things that I'll be having a meeting with Blue Water Science, the Lake Association, and our applicator just to go over their thoughts on it, and maybe we can tweak things and do things better. But according to literature, that's the way to go. So I think I'd like to try it again next year, just because we are running into a situation where our year-end acreage is remaining pretty steady. It's really hard to dip below that. So we're going to have to be kind of creative if we want to get lower and lower. So that said, another spot treatment was followed up on August 13th, about 3 acres in total, as you can see, primarily Basin 2, 3. Steve McCombs came back on September 9th. And as you can see, quite a bit of growth around the perimeter of the lake, even extending into Basin 1, which was surprising, typically not found there, which spurred the necessity to perform a 3rd treatment, which was on September 13th. Again, about 3 acres worth of spot treatments around the entire lake. And the final treatment assessment was performed on October 18th. As you can see, is very much thinned out, but still quite a few locations around the perimeter of the lake here. I believe in total, it ended at I think 0.11 acres Flowering Rush total at the very end, whereas in the past 0.13 acres, where in the past several years it's been around 0.08 acres. So a slight bump up, but considering how much was in the lake, I would say overall very successful, which ties into what I was kind of talking, or what Manager Taves was alluding to with the low water levels. So in past years, we would partner with the WCD because they had the boat, and Matt Downing was always very gracious to help out with the Flowering Rush seed head removal. In the last couple of years, that would take maybe a half a day to go around, clip a couple hundred seed heads, and then we'd call it a day. This year, it took 3 full days just for myself and staff. Peter and Aiden came out with me. Photo on the bottom here is Peter picking some of the seed heads, and then we decontaminated our boat after every single outing just to make sure that we weren't spreading any seed heads to our other lakes when we were doing lake monitoring in between the removal efforts here. And then I made this map here, and as you can see, there is a lot of locations of Flowering Rush that we had to remove. And yes, the water level was very low this year. A lot of aquatic growth, and in fact, we basically had to walk the boat the entire shoreline because there was just so many, and it was so shallow that it wasn't even worth turning the boat on. So made for a very long couple of days, but in total, we clipped over 1,100 seed heads, and I believe Steve McComa said that he clipped a couple hundred himself. The reason being that, yes, the low water level is believed to have created conditions that are a little more favorable for the Flowering Rush. In this bottom photo, you can see how much the water is receded, and you can see the Flowering Rush here growing where this would typically be underwater. There was a lot of locations just like this where the water had receded and there was some exposed lake bottom. And in those locations, we typically found a lot of dense patches of flowering rush with a lot of flowering seed heads. So that's our best explanation of why it was so bad this year. We hope that next year the lake levels return to normal. It's definitely been getting quite a bit of precipitation so far. We'll see if that continues, and hopefully not have to do quite so much with the seed heads, but we did our best to get them all.
This is a little aside, but that very situation that you were describing is on, there's a little clip video on the DNR website that talks about there are certain native plants that only reseed when the water levels are low. And so these periodic low levels that we have, I mean, sometimes there are 10, 15 years between low levels like this, but that's when those particular plants look for to reseed. And they weren't talking about flowering rush. They weren't talking about IIS. They're talking about native species that reseed in that kind of sequence. So I thought that was interesting, and I hope we have a lot of pictures of Forest Lake from this year where we could see this kind of area that should have been underwater but isn't. I'm sure Steve has lots of them, but we might want to take some kind of effort to gather those pictures from lake residents, just so that we have a historical record of what happened. It was very unusual to see the lake that low.
And Manager Anderson, up here on Moody, I noticed at one point they dug a trench back to the water level gauge just to get a measurement of how low the water was.
Wow.
When the last time I did the measure there, it was 1.5. And this summer it was all the way off the bottom of the scale and into the mud. So
Wow.
we may see some interesting things coming up here.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Yeah, definitely part of the natural cycle of lakes. And I wasn't saying that there isn't any benefits of low water level, but it definitely made a heck of a time for us this year with the flowering rush. So it's all right. All right. Comfort Lake Curlew Pondweed, again, last handful of years really hasn't been much of an issue. I think maybe back in 2015 or 16, there was a 1 acre treatment, but never really been much of an issue. And as you can see, April 16th here, couple light growth patches, one heavy and one heavy on the south. Not much. A follow-up survey was done on June 24th, and it actually was even less. So happy to see that. Then, sorry, my notes. Moving on to the Comfort Lake Eurasian Water Milfoil. So a delineation was performed on April 16th and found sparse light growth around the perimeter of the lake with some dormant growth represented by these brown boxes here. The Lake Association, as I've mentioned, they purchased their own boat and application equipment and got a permit from the DNR to do a 6.9 acre treatment, which I believe was performed on May 28th at these 4 locations. Steve Comus went back out on June 24th, and you can see that within the delineated areas, treatment seemed pretty effective, a little bit of regrowth in some of these locations. But then Lake Association commented that they wanted to do another treatment in the fall. So Steve McComas went back out on August 20th. And as you can see, quite a lot of Eurasian water milfoil around almost the entire perimeter of the lake, a lot of heavy growth, moderate growth. So a treatment that was partially funded by Washington District through a grant. They used that to do a 8.05 acre treatment at the public access and to the right of it on the east shore. And then going over to October 18th, the final treatment assessment. You can see there's still quite a bit of Eurasian water milfoil around the perimeter, but it did effectively thin it out at the public access in that east or northeast corner.
Just to follow up on that, I just wanted to say that was the real concern, is that we saw a real explosion of Eurasian milfoil on Comfort this year. don't know why, but it was noticeable enough that Lake Management reported it along with our Comfort Lake Association president to the DNR, and we are working on doing an all lake treatment at the DNR's suggestion in next year in 2022. And that notice just came this morning from our president that was accepted by the DNR. And so they have approved that all lake treatment for next year. And Garrett, you're on that work group too, so you probably got that same notice, but
Yes, I will try to attend that meeting as well.
okay, thank you.
All right, the last slide for the AIS report before we move into the watercraft stuff. This is a photo of Blaine and myself out doing a hybrid Eurasian water milfoil study. So on September 15th, we were on Forest Lake, and I think a couple days prior we were on Comfort Lake, but we were collecting samples as part of a Montana State University / Army Corps of Engineers joint study on hybrid EWM distribution. So all they asked us to do was collect 20 some samples per lake of suspected Eurasian water milfoil or potentially hybrid, dry it, send it through the mail to them, and they're going to take a look at it genetically, determine whether or not it is hybrid Eurasian water milfoil. This study has already been done on Bone Lake. It's on MACERC's website, but Forest Lake and Comfort Lake have yet to be confirmed. So it is part of a much larger study. So the results might not be available for a while, but we hope by the end of next year, we can confirm whether or not there is the presence of hybrid or not in either of those lakes. All right, so watercraft inspection year-end report, same thing as the other report. I try to go in order as it's presented in the report. So if you'd like to follow along, certainly can. But with that, we'll just dive in. So this is the district-wide inspections and surveys. Not as busy as last year, but busy nonetheless. In total, watercraft inspectors performed 9,177 inspections over the course of just over 3,500 hours. So compared to last year, that's almost 1,200 inspections, give or take, less, and about 130 hours less. So considering that between our staff here at the district and who we partner with at Chisago, that we had 8 less inspectors working over the course of the entire season. 128 hours less isn't too bad. And admittedly, the DNR definitely helped out a lot this year as they worked more than double the hours compared to 2020. But that was all focused on Forest Lake for obvious reasons, just being the most busy. So very grateful for them for doing that. You know, hiring has always been kind of a challenge for this position, but this year especially, obviously it's not just us. You look everywhere, there's hiring signs. But you know, that was despite advertising the position more than we have ever done before. I mean, social media posts, online job boards, we hung flyers, Jessica printed signs that we stuck in the ground at the public accesses. We had inspectors hand out flyers to people they thought were interested. The Lake Association had advertised for us, and I even reached out to several local schools and even recruited my wife, who's an English teacher, to pitch the job to some of her students. So any way possible, we were trying to get people in the door. But despite all that, we still met all of our goals district-wide, and I think we did a really good job and performed as many inspections as possible. So moving on to the district-wide inspections in hours per week, very standard graph. I think the graph almost looks like this every year, where you have the big spikes around the holidays and then a pretty steep drop-off around mid to late August, when a lot of our inspectors who are college age are returning to school. But again, despite the staff shortage, we were able to maintain our weekly hour goal. From about week 4. Before that, was a lot of onboarding, getting people trained in and whatnot. We sustained it from week 4 until about week 17, so almost the end of August. So we had really good coverage for a lot of the major holidays in the summer months when it's obviously the busiest. District-wide inspections in hours per day. So this is just looking at, how many inspections were performed Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, so on, and how many hours were worked. So in a year, when you have full staff of inspectors, kind of like last year, we had a few more inspectors of our own. Prioritization is important, but the goal is really just trying to get as much coverage as possible with as many people you have. Because if you have full staff, you don't have to be quite so particular about when people are working. It's just fill up the schedule as much as possible. But in a year like this year with limited staff, prioritization was key in ensuring we were being as cost effective as possible while reaching the most amount of people possible. So that said, obviously we're working Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays the most. Chisago helps out on mostly Monday through Thursday, providing inspections during that time frame. But obviously those weekend shifts are when things are the busiest, which accounted for about 60% of the total hours worked this year. But more than that, taking a step further, inspectors were scheduled more strategically during the day. So shift times could start anywhere at like 6 a.m. and not work until, but could end at 9 p.m. So rather than doing what we have done in the past when we had a lot of staff is, try to fill that block from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. We're using the inspection data from the past year to see when traffic is the highest. It's kind of that middle ground in between the two. So that's when we're trying to station people so that we can be as cost effective as possible and just reach as many people as possible. That way we're educating and just ensuring that there's no contaminants entering or leaving.
Garrett?
Yes.
Manager Baki here. I just, can you give me your impression as to whether the educational impact is really making a difference in behavior as far as people being sensitive to making sure their boats are clean before they launch them? I mean, I'm looking at your survey results and the number of watercrafts that had contaminants, and then you break down the data by year, and I would guess the number is increasing because we're doing a better job of inspecting. We have more hours of inspection, but what's your overall impression of, is there an educational impact that's making a difference, do you think?
I think there is. I will talk. I was going to touch on this at some point in here, but I'm trying to think of an example. I think 10 years ago, if you told someone that they shouldn't dump their bait bucket water into the lake or live bait in the lake, they'd be like, "Oh, why? It doesn't make any sense. They're fish. They belong in the lake." And admittedly, I was in the same boat. I grew up in a lake. I had no idea. And we implemented a behavior change project this year to educate anglers on proper bait disposal practices. And I'll touch on this, but while limited our data was this year, and we hope to get more next year, it did seem like a lot of people were already aware of stuff like that. Another example that I've heard at meetings with the DNR with a bunch of other watercraft inspection program coordinators is the drain plug seems to be less and less of an issue. I think that's probably the top behavior issue that has changed over the years. It just, and as you can see, I mean, we had 6,100 entering boats this year across district-wide, and only 33 of them showed up with drain plugs in. So that is a very, very small fraction of what the total was. And I would have to compare the percentages from the past, like 2018 and 2017, of how many boats entered and what that percentage of violations were. But I really do feel like over time, things are getting better in terms of that. And it's obviously not an overnight thing. It takes time, but I think the drain plug is a really good example of people adopting that behavior.
Well, doesn't the contaminants found entering the lakes also speak to not just our education program, but the DNRs and everybody else's? Because they're clearly cleaning their boats before they come into our water bodies, most of them anyway, but
Yeah,
because I thought that was interesting. And then the contaminants found exiting, of course, is they're picking up things within our lakes that have the AIS. So
yeah. Yeah, I'll touch on that here in a second.
Mhm.
I don't try to focus too much on the exiting stuff just because
Yeah.
it's unavoidable.
Mhm. Yep.
On Forest Lake, I mean, they pull out of the lake and the inspector's right there and they go, yep, you got a bunch of stuff hanging off your
Mhm.
trailer. So that's a mark, but it's all cleaned off before they leave. So yes, I will get to that here in a second.
Okay. But just to clarify though, it wasn't that we're not doing our job. It's that on that first bar chart, contaminants found entering the lakes, that was really the point,
Mhm.
is that that's a very low number. So people are either through inspectors being present at other lakes or people's habits changing so that they're not bringing contaminants into the water bodies.
Absolutely. And yeah, when we're training our watercraft inspectors, I always tell them that this is not an enforcement position. It's
Mhm.
educational because there are more hours in the week that are not being inspected than there are being inspected.
Exactly.
So we want people to adopt these behaviors because it's in their best interest. If you like fishing, then you really should be doing these things to protect that fishery. So
Yep.
that's always what we try to really drill into our watercraft inspectors. I can't remember where I was at. I'll just start from the beginning. So yes, there was 6,100 entering boats district-wide, but there were only 65 contaminants found trying to enter the lake. And again, contaminants could be anything from plants, animals, water, mud, or anything that has the potential to harbor invasive species. And additionally, as we touched on, there were 33 boats that arrived with drain plugs in. So yeah, given this was the second busiest year on record for the district in terms of hours or inspections performed, these numbers are fairly low. And then on the flip side, out of about 3,100 exiting boats district-wide, there were 786 boats that exited the lake with contaminants, particularly plant debris. So while this was far less numerically wise than last year, the percentage of exiting boats with contaminants saw about a 13% increase from 2020, which means that about 26% of boats pulled out with some sort of contaminant. And again, it goes back to the low water levels. So what we think is a likely explanation is just, more light penetration in the shallower water, increased aquatic plant growth and navigation channels from the access. And very easy to pick it up on your way into getting your boat out of the water. But again, all of our watercraft inspectors make sure that these these watercrafts and trailers are contaminant free before they exit. And we even give our watercraft inspectors rakes to help clear debris from the accesses, but at times, and I can attest to how difficult and sometimes impossible it is to keep the access clear, is just not feasible. Especially Forest Lake 3, we launched there a lot for our lake monitoring activities, and there have been times where the boat was darn near stuck right there at the access because there was just a big floating bog of stuff. So unavoidable at times, but we make sure that our watercraft inspectors are assisting as much as possible to help clean that, and then also, educating the values of the boater to do that themselves. Here's the graph that I added last year to the report that just lists how many boats reported last being in a water body that has one of these invasive species. This is likely an underestimation just because a lot of the time they don't give enough information in the survey to determine which lake specifically they were in, or they just give us some, bogus answer that is very unhelpful. But at least gives us a general idea of what the risk is for certain things. So unfortunately, Starry Stonewort saw about an 18 boat increase from last year, as 48 watercrafts reported last being in a lake infested with it. But to put this into perspective, This only accounts for about less than 1% of incoming boats. So while that is a very small percentage of incoming watercrafts, the district watercraft inspectors are still given throw rakes and identification books and survey charts, and they're performing early detection surveys at the majority of their shifts around the public access, looking for things like this. So we're keeping an eye on things. And I believe even Steve McComas in his zebra mussel survey on Bone Lake was taking a look at it. I know that the Lake Association for Forest Lake has hired him to do diving surveys around the access for Starry Stonewort. So we're definitely keeping an eye out for stuff like this, but it is a low percentage. The risk is fairly low, but obviously, as we know, it only takes one. So we're doing what we can. Spiny water flea is the other one of concern. So this actually surprisingly saw a reduction of 62 boats compared to last year, as only 96 boats reported last being in the lake infested with AIS. So roughly a 2% of boats were last in a spiny water flea infested lake. You know, potential future education things that we can add once we really get the bait law educational piece established is I know MACERC, they did a study on how spiny water flea is probably transported, and they found that, you know, out of towing anchor ropes and putting bait buckets in the water with, you know, rope and fishing line, that the fishing line was #1 in capturing spiny water flea. And then they did some crazy study where they tested a bunch of different fabrics and they created some towels that you can use to wipe off your fishing line that are most effective. So they have those for sale on their website. And it's something that I'm potentially considering including in our handouts, because this year we did some educational handouts like floating keychains and some sunglasses, which some of you picked up at some of our meetings that we had this summer. It's just fun educational stuff that we can hand out, and it just helps boost the perception of the watercraft inspection program, because while most people are very supportive of it, there are still the handful that are a little hesitant to get on board. So the more swag and fun stuff you can help out or hand out, hopefully the better we're perceived. So all right, getting close. I'll just quickly go through each of the lakes and their individual hours and inspections. So Bone Lake, we reached our management goal, or our hour goal, like I stated, for all the lakes at 542 hours this year, which resulted in about 747 inspections. So as you can tell, we worked about the same amount of hours as last year, but we saw quite a dip in the amount of inspections we performed, like 250 inspections less, or 300 rather. Yeah, 300 inspections less. Last year, it was crazy busy. Parking lot, many occasions, even during the week, was completely full. There was cars parked down the highway, and there was just a noticeable decrease this year for whatever reason, which, you know, we want people to enjoy our lakes, but it does limit the risk. So not entirely a bad thing. Then the watercraft contaminants and drain plug violations, again, when you do the percentages, you know, it's fairly low for all the things. Like there's only 2 boats trying to come in that had some sort of contaminant, probably plant debris, which was most of the violations. Exiting boats, fairly low. Sometimes you get a north wind on Bone Lake that'll push some of the debris up, but overall, it's one of the cleaner lakes to exit. And then drain plug violations being pretty low. Forest Lake, again, worked about the same amount of hours as last year, 2,454 hours in total, and performed 7,605 inspections across the whole board. Again, obviously, the busiest lake that we have, we prioritize Forest Lake 1. Forest Lake 3 is our second one, and then Forest Lake 3 we fill in with extras. And because of that targeted approach, we had an inspection rate of about 3.1 boats per hour, which compared to Bone Lake, we had 1.38 boats. So almost over double the amount of traffic. So we're just trying to be as targeted as possible, use the resources that we have, and make sure that we're reaching as many people as possible. Again, same story as the last lake, with just, exiting violations being very high for Forest Lake, the north wind blowing to base or access 2 and access 3, that little bay really fills up with debris, and we have to do a lot of cleaning for those. And then Comfort Lake, kind of the same story as Bone Lake, where we worked about the same amount of hours, but we saw a pretty big dip in the amount of boats showing up, so about 400 less. We still perform 554 hours of inspections and 825 inspection surveys in total. Around the same inspection rate as Bone Lake at 1.49, so just a little bit higher. And again, same survey with, or same sort of deal with contaminants and exiting contaminants, even less than Bone Lake actually. Fairly clean lake access compared to Forest Lake. So there's that. And then I already kind of touched on this, but I'll go over it really quick. Was the DNR behavior change grant, which we were awarded in 2020. Again, out of a big list of risky AIS pathways, we picked bait disposal as one that we wanted to address. And using the grant money, we built these bait disposal stations because, the only other alternative typically, we do have trash cans at our accesses, but having something that you can look at and go, yep, that is specifically for bait disposal, it really helps drive home what we're trying to do, rather than, dumping your bucket of unwanted bait back into the lake, which is a very risky behavior. So this was the sign that Jessica and I designed, but we obviously received a lot of feedback from our partners with Chisago County and the WCD. Each of them got 7 bait disposal stations. I wanted to include them on the project just because I think having consistent, advertising or marketing, whatever you want to call this, across political boundaries is important, just because there are so many different educational signs out there, and I just wanted to have some consistency within at least this local area. So this is what we came up, really simple stuff, just asking people to dispose of the bait, why you should know it, know the law, and then some things not to throw into it, which I don't think people read because there's all sorts of trash in there, but that was to be expected. At least on a number of occasions, we did find minnows and stuff in there, even if it was late in the season. So people are using them. And then this is a bait bucket sticker. It's a bad photo of it. It looks much better in person, not so grainy. This is just part of that behavior change thing of that, people are more likely to adopt behaviors if they make some sort of public commitment. So our watercraft inspectors were asked, to ask anglers, are you willing to do the right thing, yada, yada, yada. And if they say yes, then you hand them the bait bucket sticker. And that's kind of like a commitment. It's like they don't want to break their promise. So that was the thought behind it. Or it's just a really cool sticker, and we enjoyed it. So like I said, we implemented this kind of late in the season. A lot of coordination with the partners and the DNR, making sure everything was ready to go. So we didn't get a lot of data, but I would like to implement this right from the get-go next year. We have all the materials printed, the bait disposal stations are out for all WCD, Chisago, and ours. So it'll be exciting to collect more data and see how effective it really is. And then the recap, I'll try to be brief. So yeah, a lot of successful treatments this year. There was a little bit of curly leaf left on Forest Lake, but overall, considering everything, everything went really well. Excited to see how effective purple loosestrife treatments were. I think I failed to mention it, but we did do a treatment for purple loosestrife on Forest Lake. I just wasn't able to get out on the water. I got a little too cold to perform that assessment. So we'll get out next year and do an assessment survey. Hoping to get the hybrid Eurasian water milfoil results back by the end of next year. The watercraft inspection program, we met and exceeded all of our hours for all the lakes. And then lastly, we finally implemented the DNR behavior change grant. Looking forward to next year. Like I said, we're going to meet with our applicators and partners and trying to tweak the application timing and approach, specifically for flowering rush and purple loosestrife. We're going to continue researching carp removal strategies. Like I said, a lot of exciting research coming out of NASERC with the Coy's herpes virus, targeted baits, and I guess the EOR study that I'll have to take a look at. So we'll be doing that. Going to work with staff and partners to develop more effective position advertising for the watercraft inspection position. I anticipate this year being difficult as well, given everything going on. So we're gonna have to figure out how to be more competitive with that and get people in the door. Like I said, implement behavior change grant right at the start of the season. I'd like to get that out, get more stickers handed out, encourage the bait bucket or the bait disposal station to be used more. And then kind of already touched on it, but just continuing to keep up to date with NASERC and other research for AIS management activities that we could add to our list that's always growing. For instance, at the NASERC showcase back in October, I think, there was a study on cutting corridors and invasive cattails to improve fish habitat. Final results haven't been published yet, but it seemed promising, and I could really see something like that being done in Shields Lake, where there's a lot of cattails around the perimeter of the lake, and that'll just be another thing to further help improve the health of that fishery and suppress the carp population. But all right, that was a lot. If there's any questions, I can take some of those, but I'm sure you're all sick of hearing me talk. So,
Well, thank you for a very good report and the work that you do. So any questions or comments further for Garrett? All right, thanks, Garrett.
thank you. I'll stop screen sharing here.
Okay. Our next item of business is new business. And the first item is election of officers and liaison assignments. And these will take effect in January. So we'll start with, does anyone have a slate of officers that they want to put forward? Otherwise, we'll go through position by position. It might be the easiest thing to do with so many new people.
Manager Anderson, I'd just
yeah.
like to make a couple comments before we get started. Historically, as you know, we've tended to try to rotate the presidency.
Mhm.
When John was here, and then before him, President Damachek, you three of you were kind of alternating the presidency, and then as other board managers gain experience, they could step in and take a year as they felt ready. So I might suggest that we would only take the presidency next year, if you agree with that, and then you would be vice president, and we try to fill the other three positions with the new people. Or we could open up the board discussion. That's something that's worked in the past for us, where we all take turns, and then when the new board managers become more experienced, they're more than welcome to step up and take one of those assignments.
Mhm. Yeah, it's the law actually, it doesn't require anything, but every year there is an opportunity to change positions. So there's nothing in the law that doesn't allow for that type of activity to change or those positions to change every year. So I just wanted to make that comment. And then it's not just the presidency, it's all of the positions that we were encouraging to be rotating. And so you don't have, the whole idea is that you don't have one person ingrained in that position. So, you've been treasurer for 7 years, I think now, or 6. And so all of them should rotate. So it's not just the one. But with that said, let's just get started then with going through the list. Maybe we'll start from the bottom. We'll start with number 5, assistant treasurer. Anyone volunteer for that or have an interest in being the assistant treasurer?
I could talk a little bit about what's required there.
Yes, please do.
That would be helpful.
Mhm.
And I would be, whoever takes that position, I would meet with them and provide some direction. But basically, the major responsibility is to be active at the meeting and make them, give the treasurer's report and make sure the bills are paid. And then you also have responsibility for depositing the checks to cover the payroll on the Friday after the meeting. And you need also to look at the general fund and making sure we're going to be covering the general fund and the balances there. And I've tried to get involved somewhat in looking at how we're spending our money against budget. For example, this year, again, we're going to be spending at about 40% of what we had said we were going to do in projects. And so we'll have a lot of extra money left over this year because we didn't spend it. Now, there's a lot of good reasons for that, but it's important to check on that to make sure that we're trying to move these projects ahead as quickly as we possibly can. And you can do that by simply tracking what the spend rates are, how they're coming in and where the money's going. So I'd be happy to answer any other questions on that if anybody has a question.
I think that's the overall treasurer's position that you just described, and the assistant treasurer would help with those and fill
Right.
in when the treasurer was gone.
Madam Chairperson, I would be willing to serve as assistant treasurer to start to learn the ropes.
Okay,
Doesn't matter your tapes.
all right. Any other individuals interested? Okay. So hearing none, let's do these position by position. There's no objection to this nomination, and there's no additional nominations. So let's have a vote on this position. Bobby?
Madam Chair, you can also offer unanimous consent if you wish.
Thank you. Well, then let's dispense with the roll call and let's do unanimous consent. Are there any objections to Manager Taves as Assistant Treasurer? Hearing none, you are appointed as such for 2022. Okay, Vice President. That obviously is self-explanatory, but the position just fills in for the president, and when the president's not available, and chairs the meetings and works with Mike primarily on any issues that need a public face from the board. And that doesn't happen too often, but mostly it's filling in for the chair position on the meetings and signing things. So you will have to sign some documents from time to time as well. Anyone interested in a vice president position? Okay, well, let's skip over that. Let's go to secretary.
Madam Chair, I would nominate myself as to continue in the role as secretary.
Okay, very good. Anyone else? Okay. Without objection, then we'll just appoint Dave Bakke as the secretary for 2022. All right. Next is treasurer.
I've been treasurer for, like you said, 7 years, so I would like to probably either move either to presidency or vice presidency as a suggestion.
Okay.
Did anybody talk to Manager Loth about his interest?
Not me.
No, I didn't either.
Okay. Is he not with us today? Not even on a call-in?
I didn't see him earlier.
Well, why don't we postpone this until he's present at the January meeting? I thought we were all present today. Does anyone have a problem with that? I don't want to do this without all the members present.
I do, because, you know, I had not expected to have 2 meetings in January and 2 meetings in February and 2 meetings in March. So we'll bring this up at the next topic, but, you know, I'll be gone January. I think the meeting's on the 13th. If we can move it to the 12th, I could be there, but we had made plans to leave on the 13th, so I would miss that meeting. And so therefore we'll be delaying it another meeting, which is not good, I think. So if we can move the meeting to the 12th, that would be fine for me. I don't know how it fits into everybody else's schedule. Because I've got the problem right now.
Madam Chair, is it possible for a manager to have two roles?
I have to ask Chuck that question.
Madam Chair, a manager can serve in a pro temp position while holding an office, but the bylaws indicate a manager will only have one elected position.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Well, I again would like to have Manager Loth present when we're doing these assignments. I just don't think that's fair to have someone not here.
No, I agree.
So we're only talking about, maybe 3 weeks or so. And we won't do it if you're going to be gone for the first meeting in January. Would that be the 13th?
Yes,
Slated
but I
for the
will be here.
13th.
I will be here the 12th, and I think the schedule hasn't been officially launched yet, as we were supposed to vote on that today.
Uh-huh.
Right.
So there's a possibility that we could just change that date one day and not
Mhm.
affect the public or anything like that, unless I'm wrong on that. Chuck, can you advise on that?
Madam Chair, Manager Schmaltz, you can always hold that meeting whatever day you want, either
Okay.
approving it as part of the regular calendar or changing it as a special meeting.
Okay, thank you.
So currently, it's proposed for the 13th and the 27th, and that's the next topic up here. So why don't we do this? Does anyone have their liaison appointments? Has anyone indicated what they would like to do in that regard? Because otherwise, again, because Manager Loth is not here, I would recommend that we postpone the remainder of these appointments until he's present. And we'll talk about the change in the date. I'll just say to the first meeting in January. Is there agreement to do that? Is there any objection to doing that? Let me say it a different way. Okay, then by consensus, let's move the other appointments to the first meeting in January. And then let's pull up the calendar for January and go through that. That's our next topic.
Are we then postponing also the liaison appointments?
Yes,
Okay.
because Manager Loth should be present for all of these.
Very good.
Yeah, many of those appointments are rather obvious, depending on where you live and so forth. So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
but that postponing is fine.
Okay, so we're still planning to have online video conferences until further notice on the pandemic.
Right. My issue is I'll be up north and I'm not even sure I have Wi-Fi where we'll be being, plus the fact that I'm not sure my other compatriots would want to sit through a 4-hour meeting.
Mhm.
I'm in a single room with everybody else. So that's why I would
Well,
prefer to
most
move
of-
that meeting to the
yeah.
12th.
Yeah, most of our meetings aren't 4 hours though.
Well,
You know,
3
when
hours.
we
I
meet,
mean.
when we meet twice a month, they're 2 to 2.5 hours. Mhm.
There wouldn't be any privacy because there'd be other people in the room. So
Yeah.
it's not fair to them or to me. So
Steve, are you suggesting there'd be too much public comment?
perhaps too many clanging of beer cans.
Oh.
We'll be ice fishing.
Okay, so the change to the 12th on January, does anyone have a problem with that?
Nope.
That would be Wednesday. Okay, I don't have any issues with that. So by consensus, we'll change the first meeting to the 12th. Are there any other dates? This is our typical second and fourth Thursday schedule. So any other issues that
Yeah,
people
the
want
only
to-
question, I mentioned this at an earlier meeting, and I guess would like to take it to the board since we have 3 new members here, but
Mhm.
you know, when I joined, maybe 8 years ago, we basically had 1 meeting a month. And then because of the budget problems and issues, as we started spending more money, et cetera, the budgeting cycle got pretty complicated. So we scheduled 2 meetings in May, June, July, August, and September, if we needed them to make sure we did a good budget. And then as we continue to grow and got more staff, et cetera, we started adding other meetings. So now basically we have 2 meetings every month, except maybe for 1 month of the year in December.
Yeah, let me just correct one thing though. It wasn't for the budget. It was for the level of projects. We were getting into our capital project period. And with that come all of the reports that go along with it, preliminary reports, engineering reports, and that kind of thing. So to keep our pace of projects going, we added a month, or excuse me, we added another meeting per month. And when we don't need it, we don't have that first one. But it's been, since we've been involved in the number of projects per year that we've been involved in, we've most of the time held those 2 meetings.
Right. Well, I attended the MOD meeting, the business meeting, and we had that vote about whether or not how many video conferences you could attend a year.
Mhm.
And I was sitting there thinking that, geez, I went through 30 meetings this year, and they're deciding whether or not they wanted to do 2 of their 12 as being too many videos to have video conferences on. And I felt maybe we should put it in as a percentage, which I didn't suggest, of course, but I'm not sure all watersheds have as many meetings as we do now. So I think there's an opportunity here to figure out how to make these meetings more concise and so forth. And we've done some of that by moving our permitting process into the consent agenda. If there's a standard permit that's coming in, we don't have to discuss all of them. So I'm suggesting that as we move into this year, that we should look for ways to further become more efficient in our meetings. And I don't know how the rest of the board feels. I can work through this the way it is today, but I know we have 3 new members, and I'm looking to recruiting somebody else. If somebody leaves and you're saying there's 30 meetings a year, it almost becomes like a second job as opposed to a voluntary volunteer assignment. So I just wanted to bring it up to the board to see if anybody else has any concerns or thoughts about this. And if I think still next year, we should look for ways to try to tighten our meetings and to become more efficient if that's possible without compromising on the quality. And I know we have much more work we're doing now and spending more money, but I think it's something we got to be sensitive to, especially if we're going to be looking at encouraging other people to become more active as a board member in the future, because somebody's going to leave here in the next 2 or 3 years and we're going to have to find someone else. So just a thought. So I just open it up and see if there's any other comments from the board members. And if there's not from the board managers, then I'm fine with that.
Well, most of the districts that I know from around the state have 2 meetings a month, and then they'll have special meetings whenever they need them. So I don't think that what we're doing is so unusual. I think that putting it into context, the last 2 years have been just an incredible amount of meetings. And it was because we had the One Watershed, One Plan, Lower St. Croix effort. This was a state initiative, and that took a lot of time. And so you and I were involved in that, and the board also, had to spend more time on that, and our staff than we would if that hadn't been done. So that's number one. Number two is that we were redoing our 10-year plan, and that took almost 2 years, a good 18 months with some intensity. That only happens once a decade. And so you and I are coming off of that very intense, almost 2-year schedule of meetings. And that's not the way it's going to be. We should be falling into a more regular schedule now going forward until the next 10-year plan comes along. But the Lower St. Croix is pretty much in place and operating. And so there aren't as many meetings with that. So I just think that that's an important point, Steve, to keep in mind, is that we've just had just an incredible burden of meetings. I would agree with that over the last 2 years.
Right, but then as you have a meeting available, even if it's only if we need it, we always find ways to fill that meeting up. It's like having closet space at home. If you build 2 closets, you're gonna fill them. If you have 3, you're gonna fill them. And so,
Well, I take a different view on that than you do. I think that nobody's trying to create another meeting.
no, I know.
But the option is there to facilitate, again, the workload, so that we're not holding up critical things for basically another 30 days when we could have a quick meeting or that second meeting in the beginning of the month to move those things along. So that's really, I think, and that's worked. I think that's worked really beautifully. So.
Like, I can only speak from my perspective that, yeah, I'm supposed to be retired, but I am working full time. And it's the first time I've ever had to punch a clock. So I have to schedule a month out in advance to get days off for these meetings. And it's the special meetings that are called that really create a conflict at work where I have to go and ask for the time off to do it. I love this work. It's really interesting stuff. It takes an enormous amount of time to try to get to speed on it. And I have to admit, I'm after what, 6 months, 5 months, I still feel a little bit overwhelmed getting ready for these meetings with the amount of reading that needs to be done. So that's just my perspective at this point. I'm sure it'll get better.
Well, that's true. And if we had only one meeting a month, then that workload getting ready for a meeting would be even greater.
Madam Chair,
Well,
Yes.
I'd like
Mr.
to
Baki?
voice my opinion as well.
Certainly.
I work as a consultant with authorizers of charter schools. And so I've, over the years, attended a lot of school board meetings, and it's made really clear that the purpose of the board is to be in the role of governance. And the operations is conducted by the administration of the school. Now, my experience here with the Watershed District, it seems to be a little bit different in that the board seems to be more involved in the operations, and which I think can be good because we really understand what's going on throughout the Watershed District. But I'm just a little bit confused as to whether our role is more about operations as well and not just governance, which is overseeing the budget and those types of things for the organization. So I guess that's my perspective in trying to understand what our role is.
Okay. Steve, do you have any comments on that, or are you?
yeah,
looking
I think
for-
I'm with Dave on that. I think we've migrated to getting our hands a little dirtier than we did many years ago. And I think permit's a good example. We have very competent staff. I mean, extremely competent staff, as evidenced by the awards we won and stuff this year, and the progress and track record we've had over the last 10 years. So we just need to rely on the staff. And I think we need to work on issues where we have to spend time, like this visioning thing, getting this education thing worked out, you know. Even then, staff can come back with proposals if we give them some direction. So I think we need to do maybe more of that and even rely on staff more than we have been. And maybe keeping our hands out of the pies until we have to make a decision or until we discuss it to work through it to a decision. So that's the kind of direction I'd like to see us going next year. Today, for example, we spent an hour and 15 minutes on AIS, which is important, but you know, we've seen all that 2 or 3 times during the year. And you know, maybe running meetings and reports by exception. Tell me what's the exception on this report. Let's just discuss the exception and get some input from the board. It's not that we haven't all read it during the year a couple times. So why spend an hour and 15 minutes when we can get through that 15 or 20 minutes on an exception basis? Something that's different that we got to pay attention to or point out, or something that we want to recognize as a special job well done, or whether there's an issue that we have to address. That's all I'm saying. I mean, that would cut down on a lot of time, I think, if we can work together on that kind of an approach. So that's the thought I would have for next year. And I'll be trying to make suggestions towards that extent for consideration. Obviously, the board has to decide. But if we can compress the time and become more efficient, it's going to work out for everyone, I think.
Okay, so what do you want to do with this schedule? Do you want to hold that over, or do you want to approve this one and then we can always change it?
I think I wasn't aware that most watersheds have this many meetings. I wasn't under that impression at all, but that's you've been much more involved than I have. I know we get a lot done more than a lot of other watersheds. I'll tell you that. That's for sure. When you look at what they've accomplished, but I'm willing to go with this schedule, but just try to work on it and see if we can become more effective and more efficient. With this many meetings, and if you're working full time, you know, I couldn't do it. I couldn't be on this committee and work full time at 3M. And so if you've got other responsibilities and you have this many meetings, you might expect that you're going to miss a few meetings. And we have to expect that with our board managers and accept it as being okay. I know Chris he's got his own business he's running. And that's why he isn't here today, because Friday, or Thursdays and Fridays are big days for him. So so we just have to expect that sometimes the manager's not going to be here, even on a video basis, because he's got other commitments.
Okay.
So if we're okay with that, I'm okay with it. I just wanted to get it on the floor because I just know how much trouble we had getting people to fill in this year. I mean, especially for Chris's position. That was a recruiting effort we had to get. And so it's not going to get any easier in the future.
So once again, should we accept this schedule for 2022 and then work on changes as we go along in the year?
That's what I would like to see done, yes.
All right, so are you making that a motion?
I'll make that a motion, yes.
Okay, very good. Is there a second?
I'll second that motion. This Taves.
All right, any further discussion?
Madam Chair, does that
Yes.
motion adjust the first meeting to the 12th?
It does.
Yes, it does, yes.
We already changed that, yep. Okay, so any further comments? If not, Bobby, roll call, please.
Manager Anderson,
Aye.
Manager Schmaltz,
Aye.
Manager Taves,
Aye.
Manager Baki.
Aye.
All right, very good. Motion carries. The next item is the Clean Water Partnership Loan B Agreement.
Madam President, managers, I can present this one. So we were awarded that Clean Water Partnership loan. And now it's just a matter of kind of repeating what we did last time and getting these documents, getting this resolution approved, and then get the documents signed. I think I'll just leave it at that. And if anybody has questions, and I'll just also note that I'd like to talk about coordinating the board president and secretary to come in and sign some things tomorrow.
Okay, so you just need an approval of this grant agreement, is that correct?
Adopt the resolution, yes.
Okay, all right. And that's in front of us now on the screen. Is there a motion? This
I'll
is the
move to
action-
adopt resolution 21-12-01 and direct staff to proceed with the remaining requirements for the loan execution.
All right, Manager Schmaltz has moved. Is there a second?
I will second. Manager Baki.
Thank you. Roll call vote, please.
Manager Schmaltz,
Aye.
Manager Anderson,
Aye.
Manager Taves,
Aye.
Manager Baki.
Aye.
Okay, and then, I'm sorry.
Sorry, Madam Chair, if we could just schedule when you would be available to come into the office, and as well as Manager Baki tomorrow if you're available.
I can't do it tomorrow, but I can Monday. Or I could come in later today after this meeting is over, if that works.
We can do it Monday.
All right, very good.
That works. Does that work for you, Manager Baki?
Yes, it does.
Okay, I'll email you too, and we can coordinate from there.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you. Next item is the fiscal 22 Clean Water Fund grants.
Madam Chair, managers, I think that Emily could probably review this with the board as well, but we've seen some preliminary information on these latest round of grants.
I can provide a little more information. So basically what's in the memo, just a good news about our latest Clean Water Fund grants. This is informational, just some highlights that they rank every application and they assign it points and they give you how many points everybody got every year in a table. And this year our JD6 wetland restoration project was top ranked. It was the #1 ranked project out of maybe 30 or so. So that was really good. And then the Moody capstone projects weren't far behind. And so we have 2 grants coming our way. And actually the Bowser board just met, I think earlier today, because we got a couple of emails that they are confirmed. The Bowser board did approve them. And so these grants went from recommended and are now approved. So staff will be going through the process of getting those grant agreements executed. And then I will also just note, some may recall we submitted 3 applications. One was for the July Avenue feedlot. That one didn't get awarded, but as we always do, Bowser staff is willing to meet with us. They have to do it after the board approves them, so it'll be after today. But we'll meet with our board conservationists and just talk through what the review committee thought about that one.
Thank you. Everybody knows what grants were awarded, or maybe you can just mention those quickly.
So the top ranked one was the Washington Judicial Ditch 6 wetland restoration. That's in the JD6 watershed. It'll result in phosphorus reductions to Forest Lake. It'll be a wetland restoration project. And then the other one is what we're calling Moody capstone projects. And so you may recall that with our wetland restorations that we did in 2017, 18, 19, that achieved about 80% of the phosphorus loading in the Moody Lake watershed. And then working on some other ag projects to get some more. But that was really the bulk of the reductions. And so we were able to then do that in Lake alum treatment, knowing that we'll go back and we'll clean up kind of the remaining 10% that remains, which is a relatively small amount, but it'll be good to do. We've identified some practices in the direct drainage area that are smaller than those big wetland restoration projects, but they'll be good to keep that alum treatment for the long term.
Okay, very good. And all told, to date, we've received 4.5 million in grant dollars, and we are the lead entity receiving those grants. We had a nice slide prepared for yesterday if we needed it, yesterday's meeting, but we didn't. So just for the new members, just so you know the history, that we're quite good at getting grant dollars. And that's what's allowed us to accelerate the number of projects that we've been able to complete to date. The next item is the 2021 Minnesota Association of Watershed District Awards.
Excuse me,
yeah.
President Anderson, let me just make a comment on this.
Certainly.
I think this is a prime example of something, and I noticed at the bottom of the page, we are going to do a news release on this, but I think we need to do more than that. I think based upon what happened to us on December 14th, and now that we have a full-time advertiser or communications person, we need to shift this thing into high gear in terms of going out and talking to people about what we've accomplished. And I think this is a prime topic that should be brought to the public's attention, not only in the newspaper, but I think we need to have our communication people create a list of target audiences. We were influenced by the influencers of the city today. I mean, the leaders in the town were the ones that brought this whole thing up on the Aqua program. So we need to make sure we reach those people that influence other people in the city. And so, you know, if we send something out to the newspaper, fine, but we need to get the city councils involved. We need to have them either email it to them, probably better mail it to them because you can delete an email too easily. Rotary Club, Chamber of Commerce, the Lake Association members through their email system, not necessarily mailing it to them. And so each time we have something to talk about, we should try to get it out to them. And like AIS report we had today, I think Mr. Bakke had a good suggestion about going to each of the lake associations with the lake data for that particular past year, showing what was accomplished, how much money was spent, et cetera, et cetera. And that's going to have a big impact on helping us in the future. So I just want to just bring that to everybody's attention, and maybe we can have this as a separate meeting later on, or have the communication people come back with a suggestion of what the target audiences should be. And as far as talking about grants, we should also mention, I think, each time we talk about it, the number of people we're competing against. You might get the impression that we only were competing with 10 people here, but it's over 100 people. It's maybe 150, including cities and everybody else. So we should mention that total number so people understand that while we were one of the smallest, we've had a very big impact on getting money in here. And that's a real benefit for our taxpayers. Sorry to be so windy on that, but I think we got to kind of change our perspective here. I know Manager Anderson's been suggesting this all along, but I think now's the time to start doing it. We've got the staff and we have a need now because it's been pressed upon us.
Well,
you.
I appreciate that. As you mentioned, it is something that I've thought we've been lacking in all along. And, you know, nobody tells your story except you. And we're finally getting there. So I'm glad you've come around to understanding that. And I look forward to having a full communications program in place here in 2022, because we've got quite a story to tell. So
yeah, I
thank you.
think my position on that was, of course, that, you know, I believe that the old Japanese philosophy, you know, if you're a nail, you don't want to be sticking out of the floor because you get pounded back down. And so if we keep a low profile as a government unit, even though we're taking taxpayers' money, we don't have an opportunity to deal with the 1 or 2% that we had to deal with in this last December 14th meeting. And so that takes a lot of time and a lot of effort, and you don't want to have that every other month. But now that we're visible and our nail head stuck up, we got beat down real quickly. So now we got to go on the offensive since we're exposed and people know we're here. So
well, I don't look at it.
That's the only reason I was hesitant. I didn't want to spend the money when we really didn't need to. So
well, but that's one of our responsibilities, is to tell our stakeholders how we're spending their money. So you and I have a different philosophy on that. Clearly, we don't need to spend time debating it. But we're finally at the point where we're going to implement a program that we should have had all along, in my opinion. So I'm glad we're here, and we'll do it right. Is there anything else? We haven't gotten to it really. I don't know who wants to talk about this. Maybe it's you, Mike. Let's talk about those awards that were won this year from our member association, Maud. Are you there, Mike?
A little connection issue for a second. Yeah, follow up on that. That's one good point. You know, so while we the grants, you know, we're maybe ranked the highest of whatever, but it also speaks though to the number of eligible entities, but some of them, you know, they're just not able to piece together a grant application because they just don't have all the sufficient staff or science to support a good application. So it's not just, you know, how many are in there, but how many there actually.
Mike's connection must have dropped.
Yeah, well, let me just talk about these awards briefly. There are 3 major categories of awards for our association, Maud. And we were finalists in all 3 of those. And I've been trying to get some answers to how often that has happened in the past. And I'm not finding that that's ever happened. So just, a little bit of more recognition for how unusual it is to be a finalist in those 3 categories. We won in Program of the Year. And we were finalists, one of 3 finalists in Project of the Year and District Administrator of the Year. So that's quite an accomplishment, and especially for our new members, wanted just to explain those awards a little bit, and getting that type of recognition among our peers is really a good thing, and an unusual thing, again, to be recognized in all 3. And so thank you for that. And EOR has been our partner for almost the entire time that we've been a really standalone watershed district with an office. So I think it was 2007 when you joined us. Maybe you know that, Cecilio, better, the start year, but it's been a long time.
Yeah, I
And
think it was the beginning of 2007. Yeah.
yeah, that's when we organized locally with an office and so on formally, although the district started in 1999. So I wanted to just recognize their input as well. And they've been really, really important partners in achieving what we've been able to achieve, helping us with the grants that we've been successful on. Of course, they do all the technical writing for us, and they are technical applications. So kudos to them as well. And we should all feel very proud about our staff and our accomplishments. Anything else anyone wants to add to that? All right, thank you so much. Next item is old business. And up first is Forest and Little Comfort H&H model update and scope of work.
Yes, Madam Chair, managers, we have Paul Nation with us today, who has presented to the board before, and he will be presenting the scope for the Forest Lake Little Comfort hydraulic modeling, which, as you know, is the last effort in H&H modeling in the district. For this project, I will be managing it and performing quality control on it, and Paul will be doing most of the day-to-day work. I want Paul to maybe to introduce yourself. Just tell us a little bit about yourself and your technical capabilities, especially for the new board members that may not know you.
Sure. Well, thank you for having me, managers. As Cecilio said, I'm Paul Nation. I've been with EOR about 3 years now, doing a lot of work with permitting of watersheds, doing a lot of H&H modeling work. So I've worked on the Comfort Lake Land Management District H&H model, as well as modeling for the Carnelian Marine St. Croix Watershed District, as well as municipalities like Rochester. So lots of work with SWIM, lots of work reviewing models. That's my background.
Okay. All right, thank you.
And can you all see the memo on my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Perfect. So this scope is for continuing the H&H update throughout the district. And this piece would be for the Forest Lake Land Management District, as well as Little Comfort Lake. And you can see on this figure here, that's going to finish up having updated modeling for the entire district. So in the last couple of years, we've completed modeling for Comfort Lake in 2019, and then finished up Bone Lake in 2020. In addition to that, we have a few smaller efforts that were done either for feasibility work or for project implementation for Third Lake Pond, the Hayward Avenue Wetland, Shields Lake, and JD6. So what's left in the purple, that's what we're proposing to do for this scope. And this will be useful for a number of uses, including looking at BMP siting, looking at areas to prioritize for pollutant loading reductions, looking at high water levels, looking at permitting. It's a lot we can do with this H&H model.
Can you address at the finite look or level that we're now looking at as opposed to what we've been using in the past?
I'm not sure I quite understand the question.
Well, my understanding is that our models in the past were done at a level that was not as accurate as the level that we're using now. And I'm talking about the foot difference in the hydrology measurements that you're doing.
Yep, so we'll be using the existing model as a reference, but then we'll be creating smaller subwatersheds. And each node, so each pond or wetland that we model, we'll be able to get an accurate water level.
Okay.
And I think what is also different, just expanding a little bit on the explanation, is that we do have data right now that we have collected through a number of years that we can calibrate our model against, which was not the case when the model was created a while ago.
Okay.
Yep, that was going to be the next piece. So we have quite a bit of data collected for monitoring of inflows to Forest Lake. Specifically 2016, we have a large data set. And then 2018, we also have some data points. And so we can use those years as calibration to line our model up with observed data. And then data collected in 2021 will serve to validate that. And once we have everything looking good flowing into Forest Lake, then we can calibrate the lake levels and the outflow from Forest Lake as well.
So it results in more accurate calculations and more accurate projects.
Correct.
Okay.
So we can see if we're a little bit off in an area we have a calibration point. We can change the parameters to get that to match better. And then we know to change those parameters elsewhere in the model.
And this report that we're going to be completing is also very helpful for our partners, our local government units within our boundaries.
Correct. So we'll do a similar, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, and that would be for infrastructure, of course, for their own roads and stormwater needs. Okay.
So maybe Paul, I mean, I think you're going to be talking about this, but could you talk about the coordination that is happening right now with the City of Forest Lake and the work they are doing themselves to help us in the modeling?
Yes, so the City of Forest Lake is working on a bunch of surveying so that they can complete their required MS4 mapping of their infrastructure. And so we worked with the city to highlight priority locations we'd like them to survey so that we can have those in our model without having to do the survey work ourselves. So the city is currently working on that and is going to send us their data from the survey. And that's going to greatly reduce the number of culverts and other infrastructure that we have to serve.
Okay.
So when we put all of this together, it's going to be a good amount of review of survey data from the city, review of plans, and processing of rainfall and monitoring data. There will be additional survey work for culverts outside of city limits or culverts that the city doesn't get to, as well as surveying the tributary that runs from Bone Lake through Little Comfort so that we can accurately model the channel cross sections below the water surface which won't be reflected in elevation data from LiDAR. In addition to that, we have hours set aside for merging in our existing models for Third Lake Pond, Hayward Avenue, JD6, and Shields Lake. And then constructing the rest of the model, calibrating, validating, and then all of the documentation and quality control. And so all of that cost-wise comes out at $81,966. And this was included, I believe, in the 2022 budget for $82,400. And the reason we are able to fit in both Forest Lake and Little Comfort Lake to complete the modeling is partially because of the work the city is doing with that surveying, but also because we can leverage more efficiency defining the model for both areas at once when we're defining the hydrology, as well as collect the remaining survey data for both areas at once.
So I mean, just clarifying, Paul, the budget that is included, the 2022 plan was only initially to deal with the Forest Lake district. And we were able to add the Little Comfort, basically the whole area between Bourne and Little Comfort, because of the savings that we were able to achieve from the city and other factors as Paul is mentioning.
Correct. Thanks for that clarification.
Mm-hmm.
So go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say that's very good that we were able to get their cooperation.
Yes, and it's not a trivial effort. I mean, we're looking about close to 300 structure or something like that, Paul, 400. So yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, that's good.
And we've been trying to do this for years. I'm just kind of wondering what was the breakthrough here?
I'm not sure.
It's a secret, huh?
I'm not sure if Greg's on the call. I know he was in coordination with the city.
Yeah,
Well,
I'd say the breakthrough was Mike twisting their arm, and then once he did that, I was able to coordinate with their water resources engineer and get the data points from Paul and move forward from there. So I think most of the credit goes to Mike and his coordination with city staff.
Great, great.
And the fact that the city needed our help in their redevelopment of their downtown area.
That's right.
I think the combination of those two pressures is what finally broke the impasse. Well, very good. It happened. Mm-hmm.
We asked for this every Christmas for the last 10 years, and we never did get it.
Yay, us. Early Christmas present.
Yay, Mike.
Merry Christmas this year.
Thanks, Greg.
Well, managers also, just to note though, the staff is getting some experience assisting with the surveying. So we have one person dedicated to holding the rod for their surveyor. So there's some mutual, city's getting a little additional benefit, but it's just, and of course we know Dave Adams has been a great partner at the city. So he recognized the benefit of having all this information. And of course we plan to, just as in terms of good stewards of public funds, share the results with them when all this work is done.
Well, great job. We really appreciate it. It's been a long time coming, but now we're going to roll ahead. Wonderful.
Good to hear.
Okay, do you have more to tell us about this or are we ready for action?
Just summarizing the deliverables on our proposed schedule.
All right.
So what we'd get out of it is the models themselves, a memo documenting how the model was constructed, as well as a separate memo outlining key findings from the modeling and presenting that to the board.
Okay.
And we're proposing to get started right away in January with a completion by the end of August 2022.
Okay. So board, I think there's a proposed motion here. So what would you like to do?
If no one else is going to motion, I'll make the motion to authorize the administrator on advice of council to enter into an agreement with EOR in accordance with the timetable, scope of work that's been presented here, not to exceed $81,966.
And I will second that. Manager Taves.
Okay, there's been a motion and second. Any other comments or questions? If none, roll call vote, please.
Manager Anderson,
Aye.
Manager Schmaltz,
Aye.
Manager Taves,
Aye.
Manager Baki.
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you. Next
Thank
item, website and branding update proposal.
Madam Chair, managers, Jessica's online to assist the board through this discussion. I'm sure there's some questions.
Okay, Jessica?
Madam Chair, managers, I am very excited that we are at the point where we can review proposals. We received proposals from 9 different companies. I personally think the vast majority of them are very good proposals. I did send out that comparison sheet to the board, I believe last week. Other than that information, I guess I'll just open it up to discussion of the board. And if there are any specific questions for me, I'd be more than happy to answer them.
Do you have that chart that you put together on a slide, Jessica?
Yes, I believe Bobby has it available to be pulled up.
Yeah, why don't you just put that up? I just want to say that I think you did a really good job of going through these, and I'm in favor of your choice as the winner. But that was a lot to go through, so I think you made the right choice. Here we go.
Yeah, so there's a lot of information here. It's a little hard to read on one screen,
Mhm.
but we can certainly navigate through it for any specific questions.
I don't think you have to do that. I think you did a nice job of outlining it and pulling forward the major issues that we were looking for, or strengths, if you will. But why don't you tell us why you thought Artisan Venture was the...
Yeah, so when I was going through these proposals, I kind of had 2 things in mind. One was how well they adhered to our RFP, and kind of from reading through their proposal, was it obvious that they actually looked at our RFP, and did they go to our website? You know, were they picking out specific needs that we had mentioned? But then also I didn't want to lose sight of project costs, because as you can see from this, there's a very wide range of project costs that came in from these proposals. So I kind of tried to weigh those 2 things together. And I ended up with the four strongest proposals that I thought, and that was Artisan Venture Lab, MRW, Oxygen, and Thompson Stenning. My top 2 picks of those 4 was Artisan Venture Lab and Oxygen Consulting. I thought they were both very strong proposals. It was clear that they both went through our current website in detail, and they gave a lot of thought to all of our requests that were outlined in the RFP. Both of them stated specific lines from the RFP and addressed how they would address those concerns as part of the project. They both also gave very detailed proposals that had clear steps and deliverables listed. And they're both companies that are based here right in Minnesota, so we wouldn't be working with companies on different time zones or, you know, different work schedules. So I think that could really keep the projects going smoothly. One of the things that really shined for Artisan Venture Lab for me was, of course, they used our district's favorite keyword, which was metrics. You know, they really said one of the first things they want to do is sit down and clearly define the goals and the metrics for the job. And I think that just really aligns well with our district's philosophy and how we do work. So I thought we would probably be a good fit with them. But again, I mean, Oxygen Consulting for me was also very strong. They've done work for us in the past. If you recall, our website was hacked and taken offline in July. They were the company our IT firm, Rymark, recommended that we work with, and they had us back up and running online within 24 hours, which was great. And they're also the only company here that has done work for another watershed district. So they're currently doing Rice Creek Watershed's website. It is not live, so what you see online right now is not the website that they're working on, but
Okay.
I think both of those are very strong proposals.
Just one question I had on these two, and I'm talking about the two that you just talked about, the top ones. There's such a difference. I mean, it's almost half of the Artisan's project cost from Oxygen. Do you feel that there's anything that will be missing if we go with Artisan?
What I believe the difference to be is the amount of staff work that would go into it. So I'm looking at my notes here, and I believe that, let me find them here. So the Oxygen proposal included 60 pages fully completed, along with 3 forms. And the Artisan Venture Lab included, I want to say it was 30 pages along with forms. So it's just kind of, so basically how it works when they design a website is they create what are called wireframes and then kind of template pages for the staff to use. So as you build a new page, you can just pick a template and populate it. And I think the biggest difference between the two of them is how many pages they're going to help us populate to start with, and then how many of those staff will just populate on their own down the line. I think our staff are, considering we've been working on a very old platform, I think we have more knowledge on how to do those sort of things than maybe your average person would, since we've put a lot more effort into using this older platform than maybe most people have. So I'm not too concerned about that difference there. In my mind, the most important part is that initial planning phase, really understanding what the website is going to look like, what is the site map going to be, and then, you know, once you have those templates, we know our data and we know the files and things that we want to put in. So dropping those in later isn't nearly as big of an effort as determining the correct flow of a site, understanding a user's experience.
Mm-hmm. Good. So you're not concerned that is, it's, you know, saving a lot of money, of course. So you're not concerned that you're not going to get the full support that you need.
Correct. Yeah. And one of those things too is I'll mention, so that there's the project cost line, and then there's the line below that, which is kind of ongoing costs and assistance. So each of these companies provided a wide range of what that would look like, whether you're just paying them to just keep hosting your site, which would be like $50, or if you're paying them to host your site and provide website assistance. So Rymark, our current IT provider, does not provide website IT assistant. That's kind of a whole separate ballgame. So each of these companies provides that level of assistance as well, depending on how much you need and how much you want. So
all right. The other question I had was on the timeline. If Artisan can turn this thing around in 16 weeks at the top end, and Oxygen was 41 weeks. So I like that fast timeline. And again, just from, you've met with these folks and talked to them, and you've seen their work, of course, other than the presentations, I'm sure. Is that of any concern? Are they allowing enough time to actually get the job done in that 12 to 16 weeks, in your opinion?
I think they are. And I think that timeline is also flexible depending on, because the hard thing for me to ask is, one of the questions a lot of these companies asked beforehand was, you know, what are the approval steps? And part of that, I wasn't sure to what degree the board wanted to be involved. So some of these timelines have such wide ranges because we were assuming, you know, maybe having to come to a board meeting for certain check marks for the site. Or if the board was going to do a subcommittee, then that timeline would be compressed.
Mhm.
So I'm not quite as concerned with that timeline. I think part of Oxygen's timeline took into account the board, considering they were already working with a watershed district. And I know they went back to their board a couple times. So I'm thinking part of that is why that time frame is a little bit longer.
Sure, that makes sense.
Yeah.
There will be some check-ins with the board, but probably just to give us updates on where you're at, that kind of thing. I mean,
Right.
there's not, yeah. In my opinion, anyway. Anybody else have any questions or comments about this?
Well, yeah, I'd like to thank Jessica for putting this together. This was very helpful. I read through each of the proposals. This is work I did for the last 20 years, so it was fascinating to see this. And quite frankly, I trust your judgment on it. From my perspective, go for it. In all my years, I never had to come to a board for approval on things. So this is kind of luxury for us to sit on this other side of the fence and watch this come together. And I don't see any problem with that timeline. Sprints are common in this kind of work. And I like the price point on it. I like that they're letting you do most of at least the staff do most of the moving of the content as opposed to paying them to do that. You're familiar with the content, you know how to do that stuff, you know what's important, what's not important. So you got my blessing.
Good, thank you, Manager Tapes. Anyone else?
I just
Madam
want-
Chair,
Who?
Dave, go ahead.
go ahead,
Dave, go ahead.
Okay,
Okay,
I'll
I'll jump in here.
yeah, Manager Baki.
I just want to thank Jessica as well for her work on this. And I like the process we're using here when we talk about governance and operations. We are relying on the professionalism of our staff and their knowledge and expertise to go into the minutia of each of these proposals and tell us which one is the best. And I appreciate that. It saves us a lot of time. And then we can move forward and approve or not approve based on what we're hearing. So thank you, Jessica, for doing a nice job of organizing this.
Okay,
I'll
Manager
do-
Schmaltz.
Yeah, I'll ditto
Manager-
that also. She did a
Mhm.
great job. It saved us a lot of time and I really appreciate that. I had one question though, on the ongoing costs. Do we have a contract with them or do we just pay as we go like with Rymark, or how does that work, Jessica? And the other question on that other side of that coin is, if for some reason we don't like what they're doing with maintenance on the thing, they're charging us too much, is it possible to call someone else in to maintain somebody else's website?
Yeah, so those are both really great questions. So I'll address your second question first. So that question of, if we don't like how it's being maintained, or for some reason that company closes, or they just decide to leave us behind, which is what our current website situation is, our support just left. So the nice thing about these is, as you can tell, almost all of these, except 2 of them, use the content management system known as WordPress. So WordPress is widely used, and as you can tell here, a lot of these companies are familiar with it. So what we can do is just take that site and bring it to any other company that is familiar with WordPress, and they can help us. So that's one of the reasons that Revise and Lenker ranked so poorly for me, was because those were much more specific content management systems, and I did not want us to end up in the same place that we are now, which is lost and having no way of figuring out how to fix our site on our own. So I see very little concern there with that. For your other question about ongoing costs and maintenance. So one of the things I also liked about Artisan Venture Lab is that, so when you build a website, you're going to be paying WordPress, you're going to be paying for certain add-ons. If you have forms, there's another add-on for that. You pay to have your website hosted. And so all of those individual sort of third-party charges are all billed directly through the district. So we don't have a contract to pay Artisan Venture Lab to then pay those people. We hold all of those individual items directly through the district, which is also helpful if we were to move away from them. We wouldn't have to go through and change each contact information and all the billing payments on each of those sites, because we would already be the holders of that information. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question?
Yeah, my concern with, of course, is that we get into this and we get held hostage. It's like the printer companies, right? Hewlett Packard gives you, almost gives you the printer, and then you pay for it 10 times over with the cost of the ink. So I just wanted to make sure that we weren't locked into the ink contract here, that we can actually go to somebody else. And if that's true, then I'm sure we want to leave these other suppliers and still be, keep them as a potential future supplier for us, because we might need them in the future.
Yeah. Well, we own the platform, then, is what you're saying. WordPress is the platform, so we
Right.
own that.
Right.
And we're hiring the consultants to come in and do the creative part of it.
Right, yep, so we'd be
Yeah.
hiring them to do the upfront part of getting us all set up onto WordPress and,
Mhm.
getting us where we want to be. And then if we choose to, we can continue to have a maintenance agreement with them. So say if something breaks, they'd be there to fix it for us.
Okay.
Or we can choose not to, and we can move to another company to do that.
Wonderful. Yeah, flexibility, that's what it's all about. Well, from all the comments here, it sounds to me like we have a consensus to move forward with your choice of Artisan Venture Labs, and without objection, that will be the order of the day. Thank you.
Perfect, thank you.
Nice job.
Thank you.
Okay, so next item
Madam-
is the, yes,
Madam Chair, could we
Yes.
have a board action to authorize the administrator to enter into an agreement?
there's a contract, yes. Yes, so let's have a motion then to enter into a contract with Artisan Venture Labs for the
I'll
purpose
make a
of.
motion to enter into Artisan Venture Labs.
Mhm.
I'll
For
second
webs-
that.
Okay, very good. Any further comment or questions? If not, roll call vote, please.
Do we have to put a dollar limit on that, like we've done in the past, or is this different?
Per the proposal.
Okay,
I would just add that. Mhm.
okay, thank you.
And for the record, that's an authorization for the administrator to sign that agreement.
Yes, we'll add that also to the motion. It doesn't require any signatures from the board, correct?
Correct.
All right, very good.
And upon review of council,
Yes. The standard language.
very well.
Is that okay with the mover and second, obviously? All
Yes,
right,
indeed.
very good.
And me as well.
Roll call, please.
Manager Anderson,
Aye.
Manager Schmaltz,
Aye.
Manager Taves,
Aye.
Manager Baki.
Aye.
All right, motion passes. Thank you. Next item is number 10, program project update.
And Chair Managers, Blaine is here to give a review of some of our latest recurring projects.
Thank you, Mike. Madam Chair, managers, I just wanted to take a few minutes to give an update on some of the active projects throughout the district. First slide, please. The most active project is the 250th Lofton Culvert Drainage Project. Again, this is a ditch clean out and culvert replacement along 250th and Lofton Avenue in the Moody Lake Basin. This project was completed on the 3rd. The project itself entailed cleaning out a ditch, approximately 1,000 lineal feet, replacing one private driveway culvert and dropping that down to an elevation that would facilitate flow through the system, and then installing a riser on one of the culverts that goes under 250th, with the thought that if we get all this cleaned out and the culverts replaced, we'll have clean water staying to the south of 250th and being routed to Moody Lake. It would alleviate any drainage issues in this area and any flooding concerns in the Moody Lake projects to the north of 250th. But also be beneficial in that it would remove some accumulations of sediment from the ditch line and remove that material, those sediments and any nutrient that might be associated with them moving downstream into Moody and then Bowen Lake. Partners on this were the county, Chisago County. They'll be replacing the culvert under Lofton this spring. That'll be the final aspect of the project. And then also the Chisago Lakes Township, who grant us permission to operate or to do the work within their right of way at 250th. Next slide, please. It's got a few implementation projects here. You can see the extent of the project. We removed quite a bit of material, approximately 200 cubic yards from about 1,000 lineal feet of ditch. There's approximately 10 inches of material removed from the bottom of this ditch throughout its length. We also, like I said earlier, replaced or lowered one private driveway culvert, which you can see on the bottom left slide or bottom left frame there. That's the private driveway culvert. It was lowered approximately 1.5 feet. Gravel compacted on top to restore that surface for the landowner. And then there was also a riser put on the culvert that goes under 250th Street. It was approximately a 1-foot riser. And that'll help to keep water south of 250th and route that to Moody Lake, preventing it from flowing to the north into the Moody Lake Pond project. So it's clean water from the south there. We're keeping it clean and routing it towards Moody Lake without having it cross and cause any issues, potential flooding on the other side of 250th Street. We also did remove some material, clean out the ditch line south of Lofton, and that's the bottom right panel. You can see some of that work there. We removed that material to ensure that once the county does replace the culvert under Lofton, that it'll remain clear of water as it dries out. The culvert that is there currently has a large accumulation of sediment, and it did remain wet throughout the entire year, so it rusted out quite a bit. So this should help alleviate that, improve drainage throughout that entire area, and then help to maintain that infrastructure moving forward. Next slide, please. And just the final slide here, just a few images of the erosion control material that was put down to keep this all in place as it winters. It was seeded with a standard Department of Transportation mix for ditch lines, and then this erosion control fabric was put on top of it. So we hope to have good stability throughout the winter and spring, and good green up and stabilization this spring. And again, the county will be replacing the culvert underneath Lofton this spring, and that'll be the final element of this project. Next slide, please. Just wanted to give a couple updates on some of the other projects that are active right now. The Bone Lake Northeast Wetland Enhancement. This is often referred to as the Legacy Load Project. We are getting very close to completing the contracting. There's a bit of a hiccup with the contractor getting a few of the documents in place. So we're hopefully we'll be receiving those shortly, get that process completed, and we are still on track for implementation yet this winter. That'll be implemented as soon as we get frost deep enough for machinery to enter into that wetland. So probably January, February. So we've got a little bit of time to get the contract in place. Been working on it, but it's stalled out a little bit. So hopefully next time we meet, we'll have the contract completed and be well on our way getting the frost driven into that area so that we can access it sooner than later. Next slide, please.
Blaine, can I have a question on that?
Yes, of course.
Have we worked with this contractor before, or is this an indication that we might have an issue down the road with, cooperation in the future where we have special needs, et cetera?
Yeah, the district, I don't believe, has worked with them in the past, though EOR has. They had some turnover with the individual that was the lead. So I think that's the hiccup now. But Kyle with EOR has been reaching out to the new project manager on their end, and we should get those documents in here shortly. There was just a little bit of confusion of the requirements that we needed. So we've been working, Kyle and I have been working with Chuck and their insurance agent to make sure that we get those proper documents.
Okay, so you're still confident that we're not going to have an issue down the road here where we have to jump ship and switch to somebody else at the last minute?
I am optimistic, yes.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Yep. Good question. The next project is the Iron Hand Sand Filter, Conner Road 50. This is in the Washington Judicial Ditch 6 drainage. We are continuing efforts to finalize the easement with the landowner. We presented him with the appraisal for the property and have been talking with him in regard to that. And we did have a recent conversation. Mike and he sat down and chatted, and we'd like to share that information with the board later on in the meeting tonight. With it is a separate agenda item, so we'll go into that at a later time. Next slide, please. Next project is the East Wetland. which is in the Little Comfort Lake subwatershed. This is a wetland that drains to Little Comfort Lake. It's got quite a bit of a load that's coming down through that system. Been working with a landowner in the northern area of the project area. He has a gravel pit on his property and is open to allowing us to utilize that as a project element. We did some initial investigation, crafted a few concepts, UR put them together, and then I recently met with the landowner, shared those concepts, and he seemed to gravitate toward a concept that would use the gravel pit as an infiltration basin, creating a pond-like habitat in there. This could have a significant benefit to the project in that it could act as an infiltration basin, reducing the amount of water that's being discharged from this wetland and downstream into Little Comfort Lake. Thus, we could potentially reduce some additional load that would be associated with that flow from the wetland itself. So it could have the possibility to increase the phosphorus reduction from this project overall. So we'll continue to vet that potential project element. We need to do some soil tests, percolation tests, et cetera, moving forward, and it's some additional survey work to see if this is a realistic element to be included with the project.
Blaine, is that the Peterson gravel pit?
It is.
Okay, thank you.
Next slide, please. The next project is the Sunrise River Drained Wetland Restoration or Tax Forfeit Project, which is a Chisago County petition project. We've been continuing our outreach with the landowner to the south of the property. And most recently, we've had a meeting with the Minnesota Department of Transportation on the 19th. And we did get a positive response from the DOT regarding the placement of the diversion structure within their right-of-way and how that might impact water levels within their right-of-way. So we did get a positive response. We've since shared some models and some data with them regarding those water elevations. They're currently reviewing those models and outputs, and we'll hope to hear back from them soon. But we did get the indication that they would potentially allow a structure to be within that right-of-way. So that is definitely some good news. And once we hear back from them, we can get started with the final design or additional design for the project. So it is moving in the right direction. Next slide, please. So between now and the last meeting, there was a request from managers for an update on the Forest Hills Golf Course 15th Green. For those of you that are not familiar, Forest Hills Golf Course is located adjacent to Shields Lake. It's got quite a bit of shoreline of Shields Lake. There's been some flooding and subsidence of the 15th green hole. There's likely some wetland soils underneath the green that are continuing to compress and subside. The district was tasked with doing some investigation into the restoration potential of that area and a potential partnership with the golf club. Next slide, please. So several restoration concepts were developed by EOR. They indicated that there would be a limited water quality benefit, however, some potential for wetland and wildlife uplift. These concepts were shared with the golf club's board last spring. They are currently investigating logistics funding, considering the different concepts. They seem to gravitate towards the third concept that is presented here. As of right now, the ball is definitely in their court. The district has no further obligations to partner on this or fund the project itself. As there are limited benefits, we would really want to consider the uplift and of a partnership, the ecological uplift, I should say, of a partnership of this nature. But we're waiting on a response from them to see what they're interested in doing, and then we can further evaluate if we would like to partner with them on a project of this nature.
Can I ask a question about
Sure.
that before we go? We're talking about private land here, though, correct? I mean, there's
Correct.
nothing that, okay.
Yeah, the concepts that were provided gave them a couple options of how they could potentially improve their golf course without, with navigating the potential permitting hurdles that would be required for a project of this nature. You got a wetland impact, you know, would be within a riparian area. So there's a number of things to consider with potentially what they could even do in this area. So we assisted with them in that technical aspect of the project. And right now we're just awaiting some response from them to see if they'd like to move forward. And then we can reevaluate if we'd like to partner with them on the project itself.
So
Madam
even,
Chair.
I'm sorry. Yes.
Oh, you can go ahead with your question.
Oh, my question was that we're within our bounds to provide this type of engineering support to a private entity. That's the question. I mean, do we bill this back to them, or is this, because there's no permit to review, so there's no money down. Are we within our boundaries to even provide this much engineering support?
Well, I guess I probably led the effort. They had reached out to me a couple of years ago about this, and one of the things that I was concerned about was that they were, you know, potentially going to do more harm than good. And here they were, a partner on our stormwater rehab piece. So I had gone out and met with the superintendent at the time, and then had EOR join me at a later visit and kind of evaluate, you know, what potentially could be done. Because they have their own golf course designer that they've hired in the past. And in fact, part of their problem is that they brought sand down into this area, and we know that the sand would be heavier than the peat or wetland material or whatever it is that's down there, but it's, you know, it's pretty low ground. And from an engineering standpoint, you use sand to do something called surcharging. Basically, it compresses the soil until you get to a point where you feel like it's stable. So they added to their own problem by doing this, and in part out of concern about you know, doing more harm than good. I felt it was appropriate for us to at least provide some level of technical guidance on this, but I made it very clear that there was no funding available from the district to implement it. So.
Okay, so my question, I think, is more of a legal question for Chuck, is you know, are we within proper boundaries to do this much work on a non-permit situation?
Madam Chair, managers, your expenditures need to be for public purposes, not private benefit, and for water resource purposes. So it's a matter of your judgment. If you think that by spending some funds, you can create some public water resource benefit that wouldn't otherwise occur, then that's within your discretion to spend those funds. If it were going to be a substantial expenditure to explore or assist in a project that the golf club wouldn't otherwise do, then it would be prudent to do so with some type of agreement to ensure the benefit you were going to get. If it's a lesser expenditure, you can do so based on a judgment that it has some probability of being beneficial for the public purpose. So the short answer is yes, you can make the expenditure. It's a matter of your judgment and prudence as to how much that is and how it's used.
How much was this input so far?
Well, I think on the design side was more than anticipated. But one of the things that when we talked to them about was some of this restoration of the shoreline and wetland restoration, which is incorporated into these design concepts. But I don't know, I'd have to go back and, because this is now a couple of years ago, but it might be, you know, it might be the 8,000 to 10,000 range or something. That because it got into more meetings with them than I anticipated, but and that's what I told them. I says from a cost benefit side, you know, what we were going to look at in terms of the water coming through, because they were having some during the high water conditions, it was flowing across the fairway and then through the property and back into the channel to Forest Lake. So we were trying to evaluate options for potentially treating that. And it's not an unlike the question provided the other night about why aren't we fixing the Willow Point property? You know, we can provide technical assistance and such, but I mean, I can go back and look at more of the discussion and timeline that took place on this particular item.
Okay. I go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think to me, we have a major project here that could be jeopardized to a certain extent by something we have no control over. So I think it would be to our best interest to protect the investment we made in that project by spending a little to make sure we don't have a disaster later on that destroys or reduces the effectiveness of our BMP that we have right there. So, you know, I think we could maybe perhaps ask for some support, but I'm comfortable as a board manager here with supporting what we've done so far.
Okay.
I could go back and look at some of the timeline and some of the administrative reports and things. I'm confident this was not done in a vacuum. So
I think that would be important that we have that pulled together, because this could be a real sticky issue, I think, going forward. We have to be careful about doing things that benefit a private landowner.
Well, our cost share program provides technical assistance and just on a requested basis. So I mean, it's on a smaller scale, of course, but I think
for BMPs, best management practices, you're talking about?
Correct.
So run it
right.
through the commercial grant program.
Right. Depends on how evolved it is. Sometimes based on past direction, I do think it's important to have an engineer, somebody come out and look at something. You know, especially if it's if it's not just a plant grant application. So
okay.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
just one more thought or one more analogy. It's my understanding that staff meets and is eager to meet with potential permit applicants before an application is filed to help guide a project to a good place, and knowing that some of those may not go forward as permitted matters and the district may not receive permit fees, but a certain amount of investment is made for that purpose.
Okay. So you think you're comfortable that the way this is structured, we're okay? We don't need to have a separate motion to authorize this work? I'm a little concerned that it's gotten, you know, it's developed into something this large. And if they had filed a permit to do work here, then, you know, there's money that's put down and so we've got coverage for large engineering expenses.
Well, it's a separate question as to where the money is being spent from. And so perhaps Administrator Kinney would advise you what fund it's in, and presumably there's a budget in there for that scope. The second question would simply be the extent to which the board wants to have a structure for these types of expenditures, or simply some staff documentation for the file as to why staff decided it would be useful to provide the technical assistance in this case for the public purpose.
Well, I think the suggestion of using the vehicle that we've had in place since the beginning to encourage best management practices is probably the way to go. At least I think that provides some cover for any questions from the public that might come up. Because that's what that was designed for. You know, people are thinking about projects in certain areas and they apply for that grant and then they've got the grant dollars to use. But anyway, I think I just want to make sure that we don't have an open sore here that's going to, you know, become a problem or later on. I think we can take this off the board meeting and have a conversation. Mike, maybe you and I can just talk about this so I can get a little bit more comfortable with this, with the expenditures that we've got going. I just want to make sure that we're careful.
Okay. We'll get some stuff together.
Okay. All right. Is there anything further on this item, Mike, that you wanted to conclude with?
No, Madam Chair.
Okay. All right, thank you. Blaine, are you finished with your presentation?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair.
All right.
Unless there are any other questions.
No, thanks, Blaine. Good job.
Yep, thank you. Next is report of staff. Administrator.
Madam Chair, we next had this on the program project, we're gonna do the spotlight project. Today
Oh,
was
yeah,
going
one
to
more.
be
All right.
our Moody Lake.
Okay.
One, so we can get started on that. Okay, this is our Moody Lake Rehab Project. We talked a little bit about it, so we'll just try to get right through them, given the hour. Thanks. Right now, district-wide, we've seen this before. Next, please. Again, kind of our, this is our adaptive management process. Next, please. Our lake management districts. Next, please. Current or past projects and our future or projects are planning to go into place here shortly. Next, please. This is a list of the projects, locations, and approximate years of implementation. Sometimes they lap over 2 or 3 years, depending on the time requirements. Next, please. There's the other ones. Next, please. And I have those largely for wanting to have that information available for people that might be looking at our website. So these things. Okay, this project was located in the northwest area of Moody Lake. The next, please. And our diagnostic monitoring that the district had started doing in 2013 and 14. So even though that land area was a small percentage of the flow, that in fact, that it was the largest percent of the actual load. And we'll see a little bit more on this later too. Next, please. So historically, talking to the landowner, he confirmed that his dad and him had for several decades had a large herd of dairy cows. The land had about a 10% slope from the barnyard down to the wetland area. That in this roughly area. So, but and there's another wetland down here. But you can also see that it was ditched throughout and then across the road. And of course, then that creates a direct channel to Moody Lake. Next, please. So, so this was an ongoing issue, I think, with even some of the, with landowners before, or residents in the area, they would see these cattle down there, and even when then they got to smaller beef herds, this is not a picture of the site, but just a stock photo. Next, please. And we know that a lot of locations that these legacy loads related to agriculture are such that, you know, farmers needed someplace close to a water source. And so we don't necessarily blame them for doing that, but then as the operations grew. But one of the other things that the value of the diagnostic monitoring is shown here is that these other areas show the potential fields that we may have implemented ag BMPs based off what was happening in the current time frame. So, and that's the real distinction between these legacy loads and the way that basically the rest of the state of Minnesota, and to my knowledge, across much of all of our farm programs, is that we just look at what's happening today. We're not concerned about the legacy loads that have been left by these, you know, probably hundreds of thousands of farms around the country, and certainly tens of thousands just within the state of Minnesota that are no longer in operation, but did so immediately adjacent to some water resource. And most problematic is when it's adjacent to a wetland. Next, please. So here's really the summary of the grant funding that the district received. Again, it was this one was two sources. We had the Clean Water Fund, and then we also got some 319 money from it's EPA funding that came through the MPCA that we received because of the quality of the project. And we followed on with this then with another application for the in-lake treatment for the alum treatment. And this was one of the first ones that Bowser had funded for alum. There was a lot of controversy about whether or not they really wanted to do that, but they felt pretty confident about the data that we were able to provide, and so awarded us that grant funding. So, all right, I got Jason Neighbor from EOR kind of go through the project itself. Thank you, Jason.
Yeah, great intro, Mike. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, managers. Jason Neighbor, a biologist at EOR, for those of you who've not met me. I was sort of the project manager for this project. I started real early with the project doing wetland delineations, permitting and things, and then I carried it all through construction oversight. And this is just an overview of all the different components of the project. So we started with some hay conversions. So some of the cropland that was sort of in erodible areas adjacent to the wetlands, the landowner was agreeable to an agreement just to put that in hay. So that was an easy sort of fix in terms of a load reduction. And then for the wetlands A and B, which you can see on your map there, the furthest north ones, these were the ones that were the direct recipients of a lot of that agriculture or cattle access. So I'll get into what we did on those sites. And then we followed up with some alum treatment in those ponds. And then there's a further project further downstream as you follow it towards Moody Lake there, Wetland C. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. And then as Mike mentioned, we also sort of wrapped in some of this whole lake alum treatment down in Moody Lake. So that's an overview. I'll go through a little more detail here. Next slide, please. So zooming in on the wetlands closest to the farm, the wetland A is the one to the west, wetland B is the smaller one to the east. And what we found through our field work is that there were significantly elevated levels of phosphorus and other nutrients in the soil column. And so we did a fairly dense network of sample points out there. We basically laid out sort of a 3D grid of where all those hot soils were. And then we designed a construction plan to remove those, really targeting those highly loaded soils. So I'll show you a little bit what that looks like, but also I mentioned that livestock access and then the perennial cover. So, just fencing off some of those wetlands, keeping the current stock out of there, and then converting some of the real immediately adjacent cropland to perennial cover was all part of that load reduction strategy. Next slide. So this is kind of an image of the wetland A and B, what they look like post-project. So you can see we removed a significant amount of soil in those wetlands and converted those wetlands to more of an open water condition. And as I said, we strategically removed the soil that had very high phosphorus and other nutrient content. Next slide. So we had our groundbreaking ceremony out on site, and this was just in January because it was a winter construction project. So we had good representation there from managers and contractor. Next slide. Peterson Company was awarded the bid, and they started the project that winter. And you can kind of see their operations where they were excavating the high nutrient soil, top loading into off-road trucks, and then they had an agreement with the landowner to stockpile that material up in his agricultural field, which was a significant cost savings for the project. So they didn't have to haul it off-site. And then the image to the right there is kind of after they've removed the material and they put in the hydro mulch to stabilize. Next slide. Kind of a before and one season after look from February, where obviously no vegetation, and shortly after excavation to one season's worth of growing, where the cattails and a lot of the other vegetation along the shoreline had responded relatively quickly. Next slide. It's kind of a cool image. I don't know who did this, but whoever did, nice job. Sort of a transition from the excavated, soil stabilized condition to fully vegetated. So we didn't lose a lot of time. These soils, oh, thank you, Jessica. Nice work. The vegetation came back quickly and reestablished quite nicely. Next slide. So a couple more pictures here in July when we were out before excavation in 2016 doing our wetland soil sampling, wetland delineation, things like that. Another image of the work in February. And then, after the project was built, and we had, in the bigger image here on the right, you can see some of the fencing that was put in as well to keep the cattle out of the newly constructed wetland basins. Next slide. So the construction and restoration was completed in the early spring of 2017. And this project was set up as sort of in phases, where we were going to first tackle the wetland pieces. We knew that were some hot soil. We were going to see how it responded after a season of monitoring. And then we had separate phases to implement. So after the first year of construction, then we monitored. So next slide. So here at the top of the slide, you can see wetland A and B and those little tacks that are on the map there. Those are where we did monitoring. And what we monitored right at the outlet of wetland B, which is just downstream of A. And then we monitored again another point at the end of wetland C, and it's also known as kind of the Peterson Pond, because this is the Peterson driveway here. So next slide. So taking a look at what our results were, if we look at the wetland B outlet, which is just downstream of wetland A, so it sort of captures both of them. From pre-project to post-project, we were able to drop, about 35% of the load out with just the construction project. And then with wetland C, further downstream, again, we had a pretty nice drop, 59% total, but we weren't quite at our goal. So the red bar on there is our goal. We wanted to get a little bit lower. So that then started us onto the next phase of the project to try to capture the remaining amounts of phosphorus. So next slide. So just as a way to capture the additional phosphorus, as we implemented alum treatment within those wetlands A and B. So those small wetlands that were excavated, we wanted to make sure that any phosphorus that was sort of dissolved and floating around in the water column there, we could drop that out with an alum treatment. And then we also looked at gaining some benefit out of the enhancement of wetland C, which is further downstream, by increasing storage. And then, continuing with our hay cover and those crop lands. And, we were really looking to reduce another 69 pounds of phosphorus. So next slide. So this is kind of a look at the very small scale alum treatment. So we were able to get some small craft in to these ponds and float the boats around and apply alum. Next slide. This is a look at the wetland C weir. So this is the furthest down wetland. And it's basically a weir just installed to help keep these wetlands from drawing down. So it's a pretty common practice that we've been implementing here in the past 10 years or so, is to try to keep these wetlands wetted and not go through the wet dry cycle. So we could store a little more water and absorb a little more phosphorus. Next slide. So once we got the upstream loads a little bit under control, then we went directly into Moody Lake, as Mike described, with another grant that funded that work, and did an alum treatment in Moody Lake itself. Next slide. And this is kind of a look at a little bigger operation here, where it's a bigger barge with a lot of tanks directly on the barge. And then there's, as typical with an alum treatment, a pretty quick response in terms of water clarity. Next slide. So from a cost benefit standpoint, it was not a cheap project, 1.147 million. But again, as Mike showed, a lot of that was grant funded. So good for everybody. We were able to complete this work at, with a lot of grant funding. And the phosphorus removal over the 25-year lifespan is pretty impressive. And it's a pretty reasonable, $60 per pound. So definitely a good value. Next slide. So where are we at now? This is our 2020 surface water quality information. And for phosphorus, chlorophyll, and Secchi disc, we're in the ballpark. We have some readings that are below, some that are above in all of these three metrics that we're tracking here. So we made a pretty big improvement, but we weren't quite there yet. And so next slide. So this kind of shows you what I'm talking about here. We're looking for an 879 pound goal for Moody Lake for removal. And we got to 769 with all of our work, the alum treatment, the wetlands A, B, and C work, and the restorations. And so this is this little gap that we call now our Moody Lake capstone project. And I think credit goes to Emily for that. I think she coined that phrase, but that's the additional grant that we just got from Bowser to actually tackle that little bit that's remaining. So next slide. So what does that look like? So, well, we threw a lot of things out. We said we can do some ag BMPs. We got some direct drainage things. We can do some shoreline work. There's some wetlands that we found to have some higher nutrients. So there's a lot of little projects that we identified to help us get to that last little piece. It's not all just in one spot, it's scattered around. And so that's going to be our approach with this one, is we have funding to go out and tackle a bunch of these little projects to really remove that little bit of remaining watershed load getting to Moody Lake. Next slide. And just in general, I think you're well aware, we're working, top to bottom here. And so Moody Lake is right upstream of Little Comfort and Comfort. And so we want to tackle those first and move our way down. Next slide. I think that's it. And happy to take questions from managers, staff.
Well, Madam Chair, just just want to kind of add on a couple things. When we talked about the material that went up to the upland field, it actually was just stored there for the season so it could drain. And then the contractor moved it off site. So it's not just sitting up there. So, potentially working its way back. So they took it off site and kind of utilizing it as a source of compost material. Another thing to note is that we were able to stay within budget when we did that Wetland C project, that Weir project. There was a lower cost alternative, but the landowner wanted to do the Weir, and I just indicated, I said, well, this is what we could do for the lower cost. If we'll give you that, if you want to do that Weir on your own. And since he had the means to do so, that's how we did it. So to still keep within the budget framework. And on the budget, that dollar amount assumes a second treatment over the 25-year life cycle. So it's not actual dollars spent, but it's also an assumption that we would potentially have to do another treatment in the future if we were not able to maintain the benefit of the alum treatment over the 25-year lifespan. So one of the things that we want to certainly do is to assure that, there's always going to continue to be water flowing in with sediment and organic matter and other things that could potentially cover up the alum treatment. But our objective then by doing some of these capstone pieces is to in fact keep that reduced. The internal load reduction in itself produces less algae that would grow and then decay and fall and cover it up as well. So overall, we would be pretty confident now with some of these other things that we've got lined up that maybe we would not need that second treatment within that time frame. But we just wanted to have, I guess, some level of information to the board that, in terms of clarity for everything, how some of those numbers are calculated.
Manager Anderson, Manager Schmaltz, you guys talked about communication earlier on. I think sometimes we get so caught up in the scope of these projects that some other people don't quite get it. An example, one of the fellows I work with, he knew this project and he said, boy, that sure seems like a waste of money. And I explained to him, a dairy cow drops about 65 pounds of poo a day. Over a process of a course of a year, that fills a 2-ton or one of those tandem axle dump trucks with waste. Now, you have 100 cows on there a year. That has one good rain and that stuff is right in the lake. So I said, would you even consider if your grandkids were swimming the pool to go dump a 5-gallon bucket of cow manure into the pool? And just like that, the light bulb went off. And he started to understand that the tax that they pay to help clean this stuff up is not a penalty. It's a way of remediating the problems that have gone on for years that had no intention of polluting, but did. And all that, seeing that light bulb go off for him was really a fun thing to see happen because it put it in a language that all of a sudden made sense to him on a small enough scale that he got it.
Manager Taves, I'd like to piggyback on what you're saying. There were several voices around Bone Lake that were very upset about the amount of money being spent on this project as well. And it did take some education to kind of get them to understand, number one, where the money was coming from, but also the impact that this would make. And the farmer who agreed to the wetland restoration project, as an association, we nominated him for the Scandia Citizen Award, which he did receive. And when he came to the city council meeting to receive his award, he brought his grandchildren. And he explained he did this for his grandchildren. So, I mean, the human aspect we sometimes, you're right, we miss out on that. And it does take, I think, all of us to reach out and talk to people about what is happening and why it's happening and the impact it will make. It's not just about dollars and cents, but I guess people need to understand where the money's coming from and the impact it's going to make.
Yeah, very good points, both of you. And as we had talked earlier, hopefully we've turned this corner now and we will be able to do that type of communication going forward. And just to underscore a little bit also of why we present this type of depth at the board meetings. Now, there's certainly ways that we can tighten things up and so forth, but the managers have to understand what's going on to a level that they can provide that information to the citizens within their area. We are appointed, but we still have a responsibility to our citizens to make sure that they understand this. So I hope you don't think that this type of detail on projects going forward is not valuable, because it really is. If we understand it, then we can talk to our people. And a lot of us are on lakes, and so we can talk to the lake associations and spread that knowledge out further. But thank you. Those are very good comments and well taken. Is the project overview completed? I have one question on this picture right here. Is this taken by one of our staff members? Because we've got a bird in flight. It took me a while to figure out what that was, but we have a bird in flight here. And that's a pretty good picture.
Red-winged blackbird.
Yeah, I can see that, but in the process of landing, it looks like. So nicely done. All right. Well,
Probably
thank you.
Jessica.
Thank you very much. Very, very nicely done. And I agree that this is probably one of the best presentations I've seen on explaining the calculations. So if we could duplicate what we did here in our others, that would be terrific. Showing that entire life cycle. So it's not just the pound per year calculation that we talk about all the time, but it's that accumulation of phosphorus over the life of the project that you're actually eliminating. So very, very nice job on that one.
Yeah, I think Manager Taves' elevator speech that people can understand is really a nice addition, Mike, to your presentation when you give it to the people later on in January. That's a very simple thing to say, and like you say, it just sinks in right away. I mean, it's so easy to understand that. And
absolutely. Well, thank you. This was a great project and had an immediate impact on Moody Lake and Bone Lake too. So a great project. All right, we'll move on. Number 11, item 11, administrator report.
Madam Chair, managers, I don't know if I have anything really to add on this, since we have a few more things yet to cover.
Okay.
I'll just take questions.
Any questions of the administrator? All right, very good. Moving on to Emmons and Oliveira.
Yeah, I think same with me. I think with all the project updates from Blaine and Jason, I don't have a whole lot more to add. I will just let the board know that I continue to work with both Scandia and Forest Lake to try to get some BMPs implemented on their 2022 road projects. A little bit of a slow process, but hopefully we'll at least get a few more BMPs incorporated with those road projects. And otherwise, yeah, I think it's a lot of good things have been accomplished this year, and just want to wish everybody a happy holidays.
Thank you, Greg, and thank you for stepping in again. So we appreciate you coming back. Next is Smith Partners.
Nothing to report, Madam Chair, except also to extend best wishes to everyone and their families for the holidays.
Thank you, Chuck. Report of treasurer.
Yeah, Madam President, we've got income this month of $8,277.01 and expenses of $221,785.75. So I asked the board to accept the treasurer's report and also authorize the payment of the expenses for this month.
I so move. Manager Taves.
All right, I'll second. Roll call, please.
Manager Anderson,
Aye.
Manager Schmaltz,
Aye.
Manager Taves,
Aye.
Manager Baki,
Aye.
Manager Lowe.
Aye.
Okay, thank you. Motion passes.
We got to coordinate signatures for tomorrow. So Bobby, are you going to be in the office tomorrow morning?
Yep, so as a part of our staff rotation, I will be the staff person in the office from 8 AM to 5 PM tomorrow.
Okay. Thank you.
I can't go tomorrow. We're going up to our cabin in the morning early. So to meet some contractors. So if there's someone else, have the new members been signed up, Mike, on the accounts?
Well, we went through the process. I don't know if it's actually been, if the banks have actually received all the materials. Bobby, maybe you can give an update.
Okay, I can come in on Monday.
Yeah, that would be fine. We're early enough in the month.
Okay. All right, I'll just come in on Monday morning then.
And right, you're going to be signing that other stuff with Manager
That's right.
Baki.
Yeah, that's right. Okay.
But does Manager Smaltz, are you planning to go in tomorrow morning to sign then, or?
Yeah, I'm going to come in early, probably around 8 or 8:30, probably 8:30, maybe. I don't know. So.
Okay.
And then I'll transfer the money to the bank after that. So we're covered.
Very well.
All right. Next is report of officers and managers. Manager Schmaltz, I'll start with you.
Nothing today. Thank you.
Okay. Manager Loth.
I just wanted to say I thoroughly enjoyed the mod conference over the 3 days. If it can't be a requirement, I think it should be highly recommended that you attend that annually based on the 3 days and the information that was presented. I also attended on Wednesday night the Minnesota Lakes and Rivers annual meeting, which I also found beneficial.
Very good. Manager Baki.
I would like to second Manager Loft's recommendation of the mod conference, and I would like us to, at some point, not today, but at some point, have a chance to review what we learned from the conference and share how we can use what we learned with our watershed district. I mean, there was so much great information. I really enjoyed the translating equity, diversity, and inclusion into systems change session. And I know Emily was in that one as well. And we were communicating how there's such good stuff here that we need to talk about it. And if we don't, we lose it, we forget about it. So I don't know how we do that, but perhaps there's a way we could sometime debrief about the conference.
We can add it to the next agenda in January. That's not too far out anyway. One idea. Okay, anything else, Manager Baki? Okay, thank you. Manager Taves.
I was able to be a part of the orientation training for new managers. I was numerous times it dawned on me how much we've learned from just the process and from the staff here that they brought up as being things that we need to know. I think the folks here at our group have really helped get us ready to do our jobs here. That's it.
All right, very good, thank you. The only thing I wanted to comment on, I mentioned the all lake treatment for Comfort Lake next year has been approved by the DNR, so that's exciting. But I wanted to thank staff in front of the board here for their help with the meeting on the 14th. It went smoothly, and we did have some practice time in the afternoon to make sure technology was working and I understood it. But I asked the staff to take charge of the chat box and the raising of hands and making sure that that was running smoothly. And Bobby was in charge of the slides, of course. So I think that meeting went very smooth, and I appreciate that help, and thank you in front of the board here to staff for helping to coordinate all of that. But I was pleased with the way the meeting went. I was expecting maybe a little bit more outrage coming through. I expected it to be a bigger crowd. So having 65 members there was much lower than I thought it would be. And so I think that helped move it along and get everybody that wanted to talk an opportunity to do so. So that's all I wanted to say. And hopefully it ended on a good note. And I'm hoping that that anger that was out there has been tamped down a bit. I'm not on Facebook, so I don't see those comments that came out the day after, but I will ask Jessica if you will take a few of them like you've been doing for Mike and I and just pass those along. I would like to see what the reaction was after the meeting on those sites. And that's it. So thank you. The next item is County Road 50 Iron Enhanced Sand Filter Project. Mike?
Yeah, Madam Chair, so as Blaine noted, we kind of just gave a little update, met with the landowner in November. The board had authorized staff to proceed with making an offer based off the appraised value. There was some back and forth, and is a kind of, well, I should say, after a couple of weeks, he came back with a number that was quite unacceptable. And so I asked Blaine to arrange for a meeting between the landowner, myself, and him. And so he's asked that we reconsider the dollar amount. I would say it's a fairly minor amount at this point, but in order to have that consideration, we would need to go into closed session.
Okay. So there is a motion outlined here on the bottom to convene in closed session. We need a motion and a second.
I'll make the motion that we convene to closed session to discuss the terms of the easement for the County Road 50 IESF parcel. Do we need the parcel number?
Yes.
PID number 23.03.21.44.0002.
I will second that motion. Okay. I will second that motion. All right, roll call, please.
Manager Anderson,
Aye.
Manager Schmaltz,
Aye.
Manager Taves,
Aye.
Manager Baki,
Aye.
Manager Loth.
Aye.
All right, we are back in open session. And the only item left is summary and approval of board direction.
Madam Chair's managers, I was thinking about that Moody Lake project based on their 25-year life cycle, pounds of phosphorus reduction. Manager Taves, you might be interested in knowing that at $500 or 500 pounds per pound, that's 10 million pounds of algae that's going to be not produced.
Sweet.
In Moody, yep. Now, that's the stat I think always has to be mentioned first, is how much algae has been removed, and then the phosphorus, because that's really going to grab people.
Well, already the improvement is remarkable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, very good. Summary and approval of board direction. Chuck, that's usually you. Do we have any?
Madam Chair, in the context of the Clean Water Fund grants, the board has asked staff to develop a more energetic public communication outreach, including specifically to influencers beyond the general public. Manager Anderson and Mr. Kinney will discuss in the context of the Forest Hills technical assistance, the structure and the basis for the district to make similar expenditures for technical assistance to private parties. the board asked that the next agenda include a MAUD debriefing. And there were a number of comments and suggestions in the AIS presentation, which I didn't convert into specific directions to staff, but I'm assuming that staff made a note of those. And that's all I have.
Okay, very good. All right, and the next regular meeting will be January 12th at 6:30 p.m. We're back on our regular schedule starting in January. And there's no other business before the board. So without objection, I will declare the meeting over. No objection?
Just one comment. I just want to confirm Manager Anderson's statement earlier about 4-hour meetings. We do not have a 4-hour meeting today. We have a 3-hour, 58-minute meeting.
Happy holidays, everybody.
Very
See ya,
good.
take
Yes,
care.
happy holidays. Thank you.
Good meeting.
you.
Bye.
All right,
Have a
bye-bye.
good one.
Okay.